The Irene Cortés case, an unfortunate accident or a contracted murder of a mother of many. They say a scorned woman is capable of unpredictable and desperate acts, with cold and cruel revenge being the most fearsome. But what about a scorned man? Many would say an offended man might resort to physical violence, drown his sorrows in alcohol, or combine these two scenarios. Yet men, generally less grudge-holding, can be more ingenious when it comes to revenge. The case of Irene Cortés, a Spanish citizen who met a mysterious end during a trip to Colombia, is complex and ambiguous. While her perpetrators were caught, convicted, and are currently serving long sentences, the deceased woman's family claims the real culprit remains at large and is portraying himself as a victim. Let's delve into this intricate story from the beginning and try to determine if a third party was involved, or if the murder was, indeed, unintentional. It's worth noting that each party involved is still trying to prove their version of the truth. Who was Irene Cortés? Irene Cortés, born Lucas, was born in 1980 in sunny Granada, Spain, the capital of the province of the same name. She grew up in a well-off family with a brother and sister. Her parents ran a small but profitable business. According to some reports, her father passed away early, but her mother, Maria Lucas, took over the business operations, expanded the enterprise, and ensured her children lacked for nothing. Maria's older brother, Uncle Pedro Lucas, was also a significant help. Irene was the eldest of the three children. A beautiful and sociable girl, she loved being the center of attention and attracted boys from an early age. Shortly after finishing school, she married and was already pregnant. At 17, she became a mother for the first time, and 2 years later, she had her second child. Her mother and uncle provided considerable support, allowing her to pursue a good education despite early motherhood. In the early 2000s, Irene moved to the resort city of Malaga with her husband and 2 children. There, she opened an entertainment venue that quickly became popular and profitable. Initially a small disco bar, it eventually transformed into a full-fledged nightclub. In Malaga, the couple welcomed their third child, and life seemed prosperous and stable. At 25, Irene's husband was arrested and sentenced to 5 years in prison for trafficking illegal substances. Tragically, he lost his life in prison under mysterious circumstances. The responsibility of raising the children fell solely on Irene's shoulders. Remembering how her mother single-handedly raised 3 children, Irene was determined to persevere. She successfully managed her business, earned well, and had big plans for the future. Relationship with Farid Henessares. Farid Henessares, a native of Barranquilla, Colombia, was born in 1976. Growing up in a large, impoverished family, he was the youngest of his siblings. His parents separated in the early 90s when he was still a teenager. His older siblings were independent by then, and Farid stayed with his mother. In 2001, at 25, Farid, along with his elderly mother, moved to Spain in search of a better life. They settled in Malaga, where Farid took any job he could to support himself and his mother. In 2005, he started working as a waiter at a nightclub owned by Irene. Irene immediately noticed Farid's hard work and reliability. She was also attracted to him, and Farid in turn did his best to please her. At the time, Irene's husband was incarcerated, and she planned to file for divorce but couldn't before her husband's untimely demise. Irene and Farid's employer-employee relationship soon blossomed into romance. Farid wasn't deterred by Irene's 3 children from previous relationships, nor was Irene bothered by Farid's humble background as a waiter whose salary she paid. Within months of starting their relationship, the couple decided to move in together. They settled in Irene's spacious apartment, and soon after, Irene became pregnant with Farid's child. They went on to have 2 children together. It's unclear if they were officially married, but Irene kept her first husband's surname, while the children born with Farid carried the Henessares surname. Imprisonment and infidelity. In 2009, Irene's past seemed to repeat itself. Like her first husband, Farid was arrested for distributing illegal substances and sent to prison. Once again, Irene was left alone, this time with 5 children. Farid was sentenced to 3 years, but served only 1.5, being released early for good behavior and cooperation with the investigation. However, soon after Farid's imprisonment, Irina found solace in the arms of another man and lived with him for those 1.5 years. Farid learned of her infidelity only after his release. Understandably furious, he threatened Irene and her lover and almost attacked the man, narrowly avoiding another legal issue. Eventually, they resolved the matter peacefully. Farid forgave Irene for the sake of their children, and they resumed living together as if there had been no imprisonment or infidelity. Irene's relatives were always skeptical about Farid. Her mother and uncle disapproved of their relationship, suspecting Farid was only interested in Irene's money. Also, Irene's older children from her first marriage never accepted Farid, while the youngest, whom Farid had raised since the child was 2, saw him as a father figure. Fateful trip to Colombia. In early 2011, Irene's husband, Farid, expressed the need to visit his homeland of Colombia due to his father's severe illness. Reportedly, Farid's estranged father was diagnosed with advanced cancer, and his sister in Barranquilla had informed him of the dire situation. Irene, who had long wished to visit Farid's homeland, decided to accompany him. She was eager to meet Farid's father, whom she had never met, and also experience the legendary Barranquilla Carnival, typically held in late February. Moreover, Irene, who hadn't taken a vacation for years due to her dedication to work and raising her 5 children, saw this trip as an opportunity for a much-needed break. The couple planned a 10-day trip across the ocean, with Irene's mother and younger sister agreeing to care for her children during this period. Despite her mother, Maria Lucas's attempts to dissuade her from the journey due to a bad premonition, Irene disregarded her concerns. At the same time, the family faced financial difficulties due to a seasonal downturn in their business. Despite this, Irene had personal savings of 3,000 euros in cash hidden at home. But on the eve of their trip, she discovered the money had mysteriously vanished, almost derailing their plans. Irene quickly borrowed the necessary funds from her uncle and close friends. She also booked their flight tickets and a hotel in the city center, thoroughly preparing for a journey that, tragically, would be her last. Mysterious murder. On February 27, 2011, the couple arrived in Colombia. The flight was uneventful, and they immediately checked into their hotel. Irene called home to reassure her mother. However, 2 days later, Farid informed Irene's eldest son, 14, of his mother's death. Initially, Farid claimed an accident, but it was soon revealed that Irene was murdered during a robbery at a Barranquilla entertainment venue. The case quickly became a major news story in Colombia. The narrative was that Irene, a Spanish tourist, was killed by robbers who fled the scene, triggering a citywide police manhunt. However, the circumstances of the robbery and murder seemed unusual and suspicious. The attackers did not appear to be trying to steal anything, but instead shot Irene in the heart and then fled in haste. Police and local media representatives quickly arrived on the scene. Despite the fact that Farid witnessed the shooting of his partner during an interview with journalists, he looked quite calm, not corresponding to the image of a grief-stricken widower. The Spanish embassy in Bogotá confirmed the murder, adding that Irene's remains will be repatriated after the necessary investigations. The exact events of the night of March 2nd have yet to be clarified by investigators. In the meantime, authorities are actively pursuing the attackers responsible for this senseless crime. Surveillance footage. The case of Irene Cortés's mysterious death seemed to gain clarity after reviewing surveillance footage from cameras installed at the location where the murder occurred. On March 1st, Irene and her partner, Farid Genesares, had planned to meet Farid's brother, his sister, and their spouses. The group of 6 enjoyed the carnival, walked around town, and then, at Farid's suggestion, went to a local bar for dinner and entertainment. By 1 a.m., Irene, Farid, and his relatives were the only customers at the bar, as surveillance footage clearly shows. Around 2 a.m., 2 young men sitting away from the group entered the bar. They did not order anything and did not look comfortable, which caught the attention of the bar manager because of their suspicious behavior. Moreover, their young appearance made the manager check whether they were of legal age. The young men refused to show their IDs and, when asked to leave, one of them pulled out a gun and aimed it at the manager. His accomplice produced a knife but soon retreated out of the camera's view. The armed assailant pushed the manager aside and approached Irene's table, announcing a robbery and demanding mobile phones and cash. His knife-wielding partner reappeared, presumably to collect valuables while the gunman kept the group under threat. However, he didn't get a chance to act. Confronting Irene, the gunman ordered Farid to stand for a pocket search. As Irene reached for her purse, the assailant lunged at her with the sane hand holding the gun. A shot was fired as he grabbed the purse, striking Irene directly in the chest. She collapsed to the floor as the assailants fled without taking anything. Farid and his brother chased after them while his sister tried to stop Irene's bleeding and his brother's wife called for emergency services. Unfortunately, the culprits were too fast to catch. The men returned to the bar, attempting to aid Irene, but it was too late. Emergency responders arrived quickly, yet Irene succumbed to her injuries en route to the hospital, leaving behind a baffling case and a grieving family. The hunt for the perpetrators, arrest, and trial. In the wake of the robbery and homicide that took Irene Cortés's life, law enforcement mobilized all available resources. The city was teeming with tourists for the Carnival, and ensuring their safety was paramount. A reward of 10 million pesos, about 3,500 euros, was announced for information leading to the culprits. The first suspect, the gunman Brian Dario, was apprehended the next day. He quickly implicated his accomplice, Juan Carlos. Juan, 18, surrendered to authorities, hoping for leniency. During interrogation, Dario claimed dire financial straits, debts, and a sick child in need of costly treatment drove him to the crime, corroborated later by his relatives. He maintained that Irene's shooting was accidental, occurring while trying to snatch her purse. Juan Carlos contended he was an unwitting participant. He said Brian didn't reveal his plans but asked for backup in a job. He claimed to have only a small knife for intimidation, not harm, and left the scene once he realized Brian's intentions. However, surveillance footage contradicted his claims, showing him returning to Brian. With both perpetrators in custody and their confessions, the case appeared solved, with prison sentences looming. The court found Dario guilty of robbery and homicide under aggravating circumstances, sentencing him to 23 years. Carlos received 17 years for complicity in these crimes. Accusations against Farid and new crime details. From the early stages of the investigation, the family of the deceased woman openly accused Farid of orchestrating the murder of his wife. Irene's mother and uncle hired a detective who conducted an independent investigation, gathering additional materials and evidence to hold the man accountable and prove his involvement in the crime. Starting with the earlier mentioned disappearance of 3,000 euros from the hiding place in Cortés's house. According to Maria Lucas, only Farid knew about this money, and he was the only one who could have discreetly taken it. The woman told her daughter about this from the beginning, but she did not want to listen. Now, she believed that her son-in-law used this money to pay Dario to kill his wife. Another weighty argument was the fabricated illness of the man's father, whom he was so eager to visit. It turned out that no cancer diagnosis was made for the elderly parent, and he was quite healthy for his age. Farid concocted this story, making it the main pretext for the trip to Colombia. Also, it was Ganisaris who initiated the visit to that fateful establishment. Moreover, he insisted on continuing the feast deep into the night when all the other visitors had long dispersed, and their company was alone in the hall. Further, the detective conducted a detailed analysis of those very recordings from the cameras, giving an assessment of what was happening and making his own conclusions. He noticed that the criminals acted strangely. Juan was clearly scared and, most likely, really did not understand what was happening while Brian approached the company, came up to Farid and raised him, but did not directly threaten him with a gun. It looked like the men knew each other and acted cohesively. Then Farid, strangely, moved behind Irene, who was sitting at the table. When she reached into her bag to get her wallet, the criminal with the gun looked at the man as if waiting for a signal. It's hard to say exactly whether he received any kind of sign, as the victim and her husband were back to the camera. After the shot, the man chased the killer, but, in the expert's opinion, he deliberately let him escape. However, the latter statement can be considered controversial, as Brian was armed with a gun and Farid could reasonably fear for his life. Also in question was the man's behavior after his chosen one was declared dead. He willingly gave interviews to the arrived correspondents, talked about the details of what happened, and at the same time did not look too upset or depressed. Another important question: why, after the tragedy, did Ganisaras call not Irene's mother, not her uncle, or any of the adult relatives, but dialed the number of her 14-year-old son to tell him about his mother's death? According to Maria Lucas, he wanted to personally inflict pain on the teenager, punishing him for not recognizing the stepfather's authority and treating him disrespectfully. The woman's uncle was the first to dare to give an interview in the press and openly talk about his suspicions and the results of the investigation. Pedro Lucas was sure that Farid planned the trip in advance, essentially luring Irene into a trap. The money stolen from her was used to pay for the services of a hired killer, and after her death, he planned to establish guardianship over the children and take over the business of his deceased wife. Farid's mother did not silently listen to her son being accused of a terrible crime and openly stood up for her offspring. The woman claimed that her offspring was madly in love with Irene and her children and would never harm her. However, in the end, the parent inadvertently let slip a phrase about the chosen one not having to cheat on Farid, as this greatly offended his pride. Also, an unpleasant detail emerged about Ganisaras leaving Spain on fake documents, as he was not allowed to leave the country because he had recently been released from prison on parole. The man himself denied this information, stating that he left legally and Irene acted as his guarantor. Funeral. Without the widower. 12 days after the tragedy, Irene's body was returned to her native Spain. The funeral was conducted with a closed casket, as the remains had begun to decompose after such an extended period. Hundreds attended the funeral: family, friends, neighbors, and even those who didn't personally know Cortés, but had heard about the resonant story and wanted to express their condolences to the family. The only person missing from the farewell ceremony was Farid, who simply feared returning from Colombia, apprehensive of retribution. Farid claimed that the relatives of his late wife had repeatedly threatened him and his elderly mother. For this reason, before flying back to Spain, he intended to appeal to the authorities to ensure his safety. He sought a protective order to be able to attend the funeral, but his request was denied, and Ganisaras decided not to take the risk. In turn, Farid filed a complaint in court against the relatives of his deceased wife, who, he alleged, hindered his return home. However, Maria and Pedro Lucas denied his claims, stating they were most interested in his return to face trial in Spain. Additional court proceedings. With new circumstances and accusations against Farid, an additional investigation and court proceedings were conducted. Dario and Carlos, already serving their sentences in a Colombian prison, were interrogated about their acquaintance with Ganisaras and a possible premeditated conspiracy. However, Brian categorically denied this assumption. He continued to insist that the murder was an accidental result of a failed robbery attempt. He claimed he had never seen Farid before, let alone been hired as a hitman for his wife. The accusations indeed seemed to be grasping at straws, with no irrefutable evidence of premeditation or a contract killing, only assumptions and interpretations of the events on the recording. Dario also confessed that he was under the influence of alcohol and prohibited substances that evening, hence his poor recollection of the event's chronology. As for Carlos, he maintained that his friend did not involve him in his plans, and everything that happened in the bar was as shocking to him as it was to those they attacked. Blanc appeared to be telling the truth, but Brian's words, who made the fatal shot, raised some doubts. Consider this: he failed to commit the robbery, ended up in prison, but his sick child still received the necessary expensive treatment. Brian claimed that kind-hearted people, learning about his motive, helped him. However, the Lucas family's lawyers tried to prove that the 3,000 euros stolen from Irene, which Farid paid for her murder, were spent on the treatment. Supposedly, Brian agreed to sacrifice himself and go to prison to save his child and secretly pass the money to his wife. This version, however, was never proven, returned to Spain. Only after obtaining a court order that guaranteed his safety did Genesaris decide to return to Spain. Several months had passed since the tragedy, and the media frenzy had subsided. Upon his return, Genesaris claimed to have brought investigation materials proving his innocence in his wife's murder. He cited his main reason for returning as a desire to care for the children he shared with Irene, who had been under the care of the deceased's relatives during his absence. 6 months later, Farid decided to give a major interview in which he revealed that he had lost virtually everything. He was jobless, his passport had been annulled, preventing him from leaving the country, and to add insult to injury, his friends had turned their backs on him, and the mother and uncle of his late wife forbade him from seeing his children. Genesaris repeatedly faced Maria and Pedro Lucas in court. He accused them of threatening him while they attempted to prove his involvement in Irene's murder. However, neither side could substantiate their claims. Ultimately, the children remained in the custody of their grandmother and uncle, and the widower was unable to claim any of his late wife's property. What keeps a marriage going when there's no love, trust, or basic respect? Some try to hold the family together for the kids, others fear public judgment and care about others' opinions, while some are stopped by religious beliefs or a mix of these factors. But sometimes, the desire to save a marriage at any cost can turn into a horrible tragedy. The story of Jacqueline and Paul Crimble isn't unique, but it drew widespread attention due to its cruelty, greed, and cynicism. The criminal was dubbed the Black Widow and put behind bars, but her daughter confessed in a candid interview that her mother continued to ruin lives even while in prison. The relationship of Jacqueline and Paul Crimble. Jacqueline, or just Jackie Mary Bennett, was born on December 18, 1974, in County Armagh, Northern Ireland, as the youngest of 2 children in an ordinary middle-class family. From childhood, she was erratic, spoiled, defiant, and sometimes even aggressive. In her teenage years, Jackie's behavior got worse, becoming completely unmanageable, but her family blamed it on adolescence, hoping she'd grow out of it. In high school, she met Paul Crimble, who was 3 years older and her complete opposite in every way. But as they say, opposites attract, and this principle seemed to work perfectly here. Paul was a modest and shy young man from a religious family, a good student, considered very talented and promising. Jacqueline's boldness, energy, and confidence attracted him. She was the first, and likely the only girl he had serious feelings for. Jackie's parents approved of her choice and welcomed Paul, believing he would make their daughter more calm, sensible, and reasonable. Sometimes it seemed like her family treated Paul better than Jackie herself, accepting him as a family member from the day they met. However, Paul's parents were cautious about his choice but didn't stop the young couple's relationship. School friends also noted that the couple seemed incompatible. Jackie often provoked conflicts, preferring to solve them with physical force, while Paul tried to resolve everything peacefully, avoiding violence, and was considered friendly, open, and very responsible. He always kept his word and was ready to help others at any moment, described as a kind, sensible, and mature young man beyond his years. At 17, Jacqueline got pregnant by her boyfriend and immediately told him. At that time, she was in her final school year, and 20-year-old Paul was already a college student. Upon learning this, Paul immediately declared his readiness to marry her and take full responsibility for her and the child. Jacqueline wasn't ready for family life or raising a child, but terminating the pregnancy was out of the question. Neither Paul nor his religious family would allow such a grave sin. So Paul bought a ring and officially proposed to Jackie, who accepted. The couple had a modest wedding in 1992, celebrating with their closest family and friends. Interestingly, a few days before the event, Paul confessed to his best friend that he and Jacqueline were too different in every way, doubted the sincerity of her feelings, and was even afraid of her due to her temper. The groom also doubted whether he truly loved her or just felt sympathy and a sense of duty. But since he never had relationships with other girls, he had nothing to compare. His friend listened attentively and tried to dissuade Paul from marrying, warning him that he might make the biggest mistake of his life, and be unhappy forever. However, Paul was determined, saying he couldn't leave a girl expecting his child. Besides, he believed that motherhood would change Jacqueline's character for the better, making her softer and calmer. In general, Paul hoped for the best, but he had no idea how wrong he was. Family life without love. In early 1993, the young couple welcomed their first child, a daughter named Danielle. 6 years later, Jacqueline gave birth to their son, Adam. Paul was the sole provider for his family, ensuring they lacked nothing. After the birth of their second child, the Crimbles decided to find a more spacious home and purchased a cozy 3-bedroom townhouse in Armagh, moving in 2000. By then, Paul held a senior mechanical engineer position, earning a solid salary. His wife, however, did not trouble herself with work, claiming she preferred managing the household and raising the children. However, she was not particularly good at either. Jackie was selfish, lazy, quick-tempered, and often showed aggression even towards her children. When the children grew a bit older, Jacqueline tried to find a job, but her quarrelsome and confrontational nature meant she never stayed employed for long. Furthermore, she spent nearly every evening at bars, consuming alcoholic drinks while her husband remained home with their daughter and son. Even when sober, Mrs. Crimble was not the most pleasant person, and under the influence of alcohol, she turned into a real fury. She not only provoked conflicts but also engaged in fights, used foul language, and behaved inappropriately with various men. Any remarks or requests to behave more modestly were met with aggression, and no one could predict what she might do next. Neighbors and family friends were aware of what was happening and genuinely felt sorry for Paul and the children, who suffered the most from Jacqueline's antics. Since the family lived in a small, quiet town, many people knew about the young woman's escapades and tried to avoid her. Her bad reputation affected her husband and children, who faced repercussions from peers at school. Jackie led a wild lifestyle without trying to hide it, frequently visiting entertainment venues. However, her presence there frightened not only other patrons but also the staff, who knew that her arrival inevitably meant a conflict or fight. Jacqueline kept her family in fear because she could lash out at them at any moment. Paul tried not to complain about the situation, but his friends, family, and colleagues noticed his discomfort around his wife, or even just mentioning her. He was often advised to leave this woman, but Paul feared losing the chance to see his children. In any argument, Jackie would immediately threaten to cut him off from their daughter and son. She also threatened to harm him by involving her acquaintances. These were men she regularly met at bars, who were ready to commit crimes for her sake. Paul usually yielded to his wife in such situations and kept silent. The mysterious attack. On Sunday morning, June 20th, 2004, a frightened woman called the emergency services, pleading for help. She claimed that 3 strangers attacked her and her husband in their home, beating them, tying them up, attempting to rob them, and then driving away with their car, taking her husband with them. The caller was Jacqueline Crimble, and police officers and medics immediately rushed to the address she provided. At the house, they found a woman with her hands tied behind her back with a plastic cable tie. However, her legs were not bound, leading the authorities to believe she had managed to partially free herself. Notably, the victim had no injuries or bruises on her body, even though she initially claimed that the attackers had beaten and tied them up. Fortunately, the couple's children were not at home, as they had been sent to spend the weekend with their paternal grandparents. According to Jacqueline, the previous evening on Saturday, she and her husband had gone to a bar to relax. They drank and returned home after midnight. However, as Paul was opening the front door, 3 figures suddenly jumped out of the darkness and pushed them inside the house. The intruders, brandishing a gun, tied up the couple, beat them, and demanded money and prohibited substances. Allegedly, Paul tried to reason with the criminals, begging them to release him and his wife and promising not to call the police, but this only angered them. They hit him several times and then began to strangle him with a plastic bag in front of the terrified Jacqueline. When it became clear that there was no cash or prohibited substances in the house, the intruders decided to at least steal the car, but for some reason took the owner with them, leaving the bound woman behind. After the criminals drove away with Paul, Jacqueline managed to reach the phone and call the police using her tongue. She was sure her husband might still be alive and begged the detectives to find and save him immediately. However, despite her distress, the woman appeared and acted suspiciously calm, though the authorities had no reason to distrust her at that moment. The mutilated body in the trunk. The couple's car was immediately reported missing throughout the county, and investigators began collecting evidence at the crime scene. They tried to gather any details about the attackers, but Jacqueline claimed that the criminals wore masks. She couldn't recall any distinguishing features like clothing details, speech defects, limping, or anything similar. All she could say was that there were 3 of them, and they were men. By Monday morning, less than a day after the search began, the Crimble family car was found abandoned just 3 miles from the house where the attack had taken place. It was parked in a deserted alley next to a long vacant house. Inside the trunk was the mutilated body of its owner, bearing clear signs of beating and torture. The 35-year-old man's hands were tied behind his back, his legs bound with a cable tie, and his face and body covered with numerous bruises. When Jackie was informed of the gruesome discovery, she reacted surprisingly calmly. It seemed the brutal deprivation of her husband, the father of her children, didn't bother her much. She tried to feign surprise and pain but couldn't muster a single tear and literally asked when she would get her car back within a minute. This all appeared very suspicious, prompting law enforcement to take a closer look at the young widow. The main suspect. Initially, Jacqueline's version was not questioned and was considered the only credible account. However, the strange behavior of the widowed mother of 2 led law enforcement to suspect she might be lying. Soon it was revealed that her marriage to Paul had been falling apart for a long time, and she was never a model wife and mother. Not only neighbors and acquaintances spoke poorly of her, but even her children and parents. It also came to light that Jackie had been seeing a man named Roger Ferguson for several months. He owned a farm in Armagh where he lived with his mother. She and Crimble were often seen together in various entertainment venues in town, drinking alcohol. Moreover, Roger visited the married woman at her home when her husband was at work and the children were at school and daycare. Just the day after the car with the disfigured body was found, Jacqueline went from victim to the main suspect, and Roger was considered a possible accomplice. The woman did not appear to be a grieving widow and was much more concerned about getting her car back. Furthermore, her account of an attack by a gang of armed addicts sounded implausible. Nothing like this had ever happened in the quiet town before, and where had they gone after abandoning the vehicle with a body in the trunk? Additionally, the mysterious criminals managed to leave no traces, which was also strange. There were no other witnesses who saw suspicious strangers in town. However, almost everyone who ever interacted with the victim spoke negatively about her. Moreover, it soon emerged that the deceased man had an insurance policy, and his wife could expect a large payout of £300,000 sterling in the event of his passing. Now, a real motive had appeared in this case, which could explain the crime. Investigation into the crime. Jacqueline claimed she managed to call for help by dialing on a button phone with her tongue. The device was taken for examination, and indeed, traces of her saliva were found on it. However, at the initial crime scene inspection, investigators noted the phone was on the coffee table face down. With her hands tied behind her back, there was no way she could have turned it over after the call or dialed for help if it was in that position from the start. The couple's home computer search history revealed strange queries. Someone had been looking for information on life insurance, payout amounts, and procedures in the event of the policyholders passing for months. When Jacqueline was directly asked about this, she said she knew nothing and suggested that perhaps Paul was interested in it. Roger Ferguson, who was considered a potential accomplice in the crime, had a rock-solid alibi. His mother claimed he spent the night at home because he wasn't feeling well, and around 1:30 in the morning, she was searching the home medicine cabinet for something to treat his stomach issues. Despite the elderly woman's convincing testimony, they didn't remove her son from the suspect list just yet. Police decided to track the suspect's locations on the night of the crime through their cell phone signals, discovering that Roger had not been home as his mother claimed. Instead, he was at the Crimbles' house, where he stayed for several hours. Additionally, he continued his relationship with the widowed woman, and they were seen together at a bar the day after Paul's funeral. Another curious detail was that Jacqueline and Roger visited a car dealership together, where they were looking at SUVs and inquiring about installment plans for such an expensive purchase. Roger's mother was even with them, which seemed even more suspicious. The police suspected that the lovers had already planned how they would spend the insurance payout after Paul's passing, and Roger's mother was likely aware. However, during interrogations, Jackie insisted she never cheated on her husband and certainly didn't wish him harm, but no one believed her anymore. Shortly before the tragedy, Jacqueline had started working as a caregiver in a nursing home, but lasted only a few weeks before being fired due to constant conflicts and lies. Nevertheless, she didn't tell her husband, continuing to pretend she was going to work or had night shifts while staying at Ferguson's house. The deception was accidentally revealed when Paul met one of his wife's former colleagues who told him everything. He tried to talk to his wife, but this only sparked another argument. She threatened to leave him for her lover, take the children, and forbid their biological father from approaching them. This was Paul's biggest fear, so he agreed to compromise and turned a blind eye to her infidelity. He could only confide in his closest friend, who later testified in court as a witness, recounting Paul's words. The development and execution of a devious plan. Roger wasn't particularly smart. He was strong but somewhat simple-minded and easily led. Jacqueline quickly managed to completely dominate him, manipulating her lover to do her bidding. He would readily get into a fight for her, which flattered her immensely. He was likely genuinely in love with her and believed everything she said. The woman complained to Ferguson about her husband, accusing him of being rude, cruel, and even physically abusive. Naturally, this was all lies, but with each complaint, the lover grew to despise Paul more, believing he was harming and oppressing Jacqueline and was the main obstacle to their happiness together. She implanted the idea in his mind that by eliminating her husband, all their problems would be solved, allowing them to be together while receiving a substantial sum of money for a comfortable life. About 2 weeks before the tragedy, Mrs. Crimble tried to find people willing to commit the crime for money, but after considering several options, she and Roger abandoned the idea. It seemed the lovers decided they could carry it out themselves without leaving evidence or witnesses, ensuring they kept the entire insurance payout. On Friday, June 18th, Jacqueline took the children to stay with their grandparents for the weekend. On Saturday, she suggested that her husband go out for drinks to relax and talk. Paul gladly accepted the offer, thinking it might help their relationship. He didn't realize it was an invitation to his demise. That night, people in the bar noticed Jackie trying hard to get her non-drinking husband intoxicated. She bought drinks and practically forced him to knock back one shot after another, then led her staggering husband out of the bar after midnight. They were caught on surveillance cameras, and that was the last time Paul was seen alive. This revealed a significant timing discrepancy. The bar was a 10-minute walk from the couple's home, and the attack occurred immediately upon their return, lasting no more than 15 minutes, according to Jacqueline. After that, her husband was supposedly kidnapped and driven away in their car, and she immediately called the police. However, about an hour and a half elapsed between the time they were captured on camera and the call to the police. Investigators believed this time was spent by the perpetrators covering their tracks and staging the scene of an attack by third parties. Moreover, Jacqueline apparently intentionally got her husband drunk so he couldn't resist. According to her, the criminals kicked Paul while he was down, then began to strangle him by placing a plastic bag over his head and securing it with tape. The nature of the injuries on the deceased's body confirmed her account, but the police were nearly certain by then that the assailants were she and her lover, Ferguson. Incontrovertible evidence. After a long and thorough examination of the crime scene, detectives found a partially erased footprint of a man's shoe, which had been obviously attempted to be cleaned, but poorly. The tread pattern matched Roger's shoes, but this evidence could be considered circumstantial. However, there were other, more substantial pieces of evidence against the criminal couple. In the kitchen trash, a cigarette butt with Roger's saliva was found, and on the cable tie that bound Jacqueline's hands was a partial fingerprint of his. Moreover, on the ties binding the deceased's hands and feet, Ferguson's fingerprints were present, and on the bag used to suffocate the victim, sweat and oil traces of both lovers were found. The investigation also uncovered another participant in this brutal crime, a minor acquaintance of Roger named Colin Robinson. Roger called him on the night of the attack, asking for a favor to help with something unspecified. The teenager drove his car, left it at the end of the street at Roger's request, and walked to the house to avoid attracting attention. When Colin realized what was happening, he wanted to run, but Roger intimidated him and by threatening with a knife, forced him to help move the body to the car and load it into the trunk. Afterward, they drove the car to a deserted place and abandoned it. Initially, the frightened young man denied his involvement in the crime, but he broke down during the second interrogation and began to confess. Trial and sentence. The investigation lasted several months. During this time, they gathered undeniable evidence, interviewed all witnesses, and obtained a confession from the third participant in the crime. However, the trial of the criminals only began in the spring of 2007, almost 3 years after Paul Crimble's deprivation of life. On May 7, 2007, Jacqueline and Roger were found guilty of a premeditated crime with the intent to obtain insurance money. The widow was sentenced to 20 years in prison, while her lover and accomplice received 18 years. The young accomplice, Colin Robinson, was sentenced to 3 years for assisting the criminals and attempting to cover up the truth. Roger's elderly mother also couldn't escape responsibility for perjury and providing a false alibi for her son. However, considering the woman's advanced age and her serious health problems, she was given only a year of probation. Revenge on her own children. Even in prison, Jacqueline continued to ruin her family's lives. She was angry that no one supported her in court and that everyone who knew her personally was relieved when she went behind bars. Even her own mother said that people like Jackie should be isolated from society forever so that they can't harm anyone. Interestingly, a few days after the funeral, Jacqueline burned all of her late husband's belongings and photos, so nothing in the house reminded her of him. Danielle somehow managed to save a couple of photos with her father. She kept them in her bedside table, and her mother simply didn't know about them. The insurance payout of £300,000, for which Paul was assassinated, went to his children. Danielle and Adam lost both parents overnight, but their troubles didn't end there. Their mother was adamantly against either her parents or the murdered husband's parents raising the children. She did everything to deprive them of guardianship rights, so the children ended up in foster care despite having living grandparents. At the time of the tragedy, Danielle was only 11, and her brother Adam was barely 5. Jacqueline managed to retain her parental rights and attempted to manipulate her children from prison. Specifically, she wanted them to publicly declare her innocence using various pressure tactics. For example, she promised to sign permission for their school trips if they visited her in prison, but she deceived them. During the visit, she demanded they testify in her favor and refused to sign the document. As a result, the brother and sister were the only ones who couldn't go on weekend excursions with their class. Now Danielle is 31, living in Basingstoke, working in a daycare, and dating a man named Simon Bryce, who is an engineer. Her brother, now 25, has a good education and moved to London. Jacqueline is set to be released next year, and her adult children are seriously worried that their mother will continue to do everything possible to poison their lives. The price of love. What determines our future? Definitely the decisions we make and the actions we take. However, sometimes chance intervenes in the usual way of life, and then they say that you can't escape fate. Also happened to the heroes of today's story, Joseph and Olga Connell, whose life paths crossed in an unexpected way after which the couple never parted. Unfortunately, the lovers could not enjoy each other to the fullest, as they were destined for a terrible fate. Around 2 a.m. on September 23, 2013, a series of gunshots rang out near the Paladin Club condominium in Wilmington, Delaware. When eyewitnesses ran to the scene, they saw a man and a woman lying on the ground. A little later, a call went out to emergency services. The caller reported the attack and its victims. Medics arrived and administered first aid. Despite the gunshot wounds to the face and loss of blood, the victim was alive, which could not be said about her companion. The bullet-riddled man showed no signs of life. Apparently, he was killed instantly, shot in the back of the head. Unfortunately, time was running against him. Realizing this, police officers questioned the woman about what had happened. In response, she uttered something inaudible and lost consciousness. The victim was rushed to the hospital. However, halfway there, she gave up her last attempts to fight for life and died. Working at the scene, specialists found personal belongings and documents. Connell's newlyweds turned out to be the deceased. All valuables, wallet, purse, cell phones, and even the diamond ring on Olga's hand were not stolen, which means that the attack was not an attempted robbery, but a targeted murder. It was later determined that the victims were attacked outside their home. After the young men returned home from celebrating their spouse's 39th birthday, the attackers acted in a treacherous manner and fired approximately 25 shots into their backs. Detectives had to figure out what interrupted the couple's love affair and whether the motive for the crime could have been a long-running domestic dispute. Connell family. Joseph was born into a successful and close-knit family. He was the middle child and had an older brother, John, and a younger sister, Kelly. During the younger years, the children often quarreled over nothing, but when their parents divorced, they rallied and became inseparable. After the breakup of relations, the guys stayed to live with their mother. After a while, another man appeared in the life of a woman. The new marriage turned out to be successful in all plans. The family still did not need anything, and the stepfather replaced the father. The family lived in a fairly quiet and cozy neighborhood. During the day, everyone went about their business, and in the evenings, everyone gathered around the round table and discussed personal events. Joe grew up a correct and persistent boy. However, these qualities were more about school and work. Otherwise, he was a fun-loving boy and the soul of the company. Even from an early age, the young man dreamed of starting his own business and to establish himself as a businessman. Thanks to his business acumen and resourcefulness, his efforts bore fruit. Together with his best friend, Christopher Rivers, the hero of the story became the owner of a machine store and a specialized store in Tullyville. Everyone in the neighborhood knew the young men as successful partners who had risen from scratch. The buddies were very friendly, moreover, burned a common idea, and developed their business. The story of acquaintance. Joseph was a convinced bachelor until he met a Russian beauty, Olga. Communication between the young people began on the dating site. They quickly found common topics for conversation, as they were already quite mature people with a lot of life experience. A female friend admitted online that she was in the process of divorce and had only recently moved to the United States. The man told about his experienced relationships and plans for the future. Both interlocutors were sociable and bright personalities, had similar interests and views on life. Therefore, it is not surprising that gradually their feelings grew into something more. One day, Joe realized that he no longer imagines his life without his beloved and made her an offer. Olga reciprocated. The only nuance was the fact that the bride has not yet been presented to the family. However, the man did not fear for this. He was confident in his choice and in the reaction of relatives. The beauty and character of the chosen one charmed his relatives. They were in shock that there was a woman who managed to melt the heart of a hot, loving relative. Relationships of the couple developed rapidly. Joe took Olga everywhere with him, proud of her appearance and charisma, therefore without shyness did not hide his love. However, over time it became clear that behind the female malleability and tenderness hides a real Siberian temperament where the beloved was born. Her irrepressible energy and entrepreneurial spirit amazed everyone. she seemed to be able to do anything. Connell was so delighted and in love that he decided not to postpone the wedding in a long time. Perhaps he was in such a hurry to get married, unwittingly anticipating the coming events. Such people are usually said, in a hurry to live. Surely each of you have encountered such examples in your environment. Investigation. After the attack, the police interviewed the crowd, bystanders and neighbors of the victims. Perhaps among them were those who could clarify something. Unfortunately, none of them had seen what had happened. However, many people heard gunshots which caused them to run away. There were even those who claimed to have heard loud male voices shortly before the shooting. They seemed to be arguing with the newlyweds about something. Violent crime ensued. Not far from the scene of the crime, forensic experts found a large number of fired casings that belonged to two different types of weapons. Thus, it became clear that there were several attackers. The sheer number of gunshots indicated that the couple was initially given a death sentence. It is unlikely that anyone would have managed to stay alive in such a shootout. To carry out their plan, the criminals waited for the young people to return from the party. The birthday party took place in one of the popular bars. Friends and some members of the Connell family came to the party. Everyone had fun and danced until midnight, and when they were tired, they went home. The couple parked their car at the house and headed toward the front entrance. It was at this point that the intruders found the most opportune time to carry out their criminal scheme. The next step in the investigation was to interview the family members of the victims. Officers spoke to Joseph's parents. They asked about the couple's alleged enemies and detractors. But the man's mother and stepfather replied that they knew nothing about it. At first glance, the newlyweds had no foes. On the other hand, there is hardly anyone who does not have envious people. In any case, none of the newly wedded spouses told it. At the same time, the detectives heard some curious information. It turns out that Joe and his sister Kelly had a spat on the eve of the wedding. It concerned an expensive family ring encrusted with diamonds. According to experts, its value was about $20,000. After the quarrel, relations between the relatives were not the same. However, all relatives claimed that Kelly would never have gone to the crime. Especially, it turned out that after the attack, the ring remained on Olga's finger. Nevertheless, the version about the hidden offense had to be checked. By a strange coincidence, on the unfortunate night, Kelly was one of the first on the scene of the crime. Despite the fact that the woman lived in another neighborhood, that time she was nearby. The ring story. The lovers planned to get married in the Virgin Islands. The only thing that marred the wedding preparations was the engagement ring. According to family tradition, the mother passed the family jewel to her son. However, the jewelry had already been given to the youngest daughter for the wedding, which took place 10 years ago. In order not to change the established custom, Joe discreetly took the ring from his sister and replaced the precious stones with zirconium. After that, he secretly returned the ring to the mistress and diamonds inserted into the setting of Olga's engagement jewelry. The deed of the protagonist is difficult to explain, especially given his financial situation. Perhaps in this way, he decided not to violate the established rules. It was assumed that none of the women should not have guessed it. However, things had not gone as calculated. Kelly noticed the switch and began looking for the culprit. When the younger sister learned of her brother's action, she was extremely outraged. Understandably, she expressed her indignation to Joseph. However, the latter was very upset, as he thought that the sister was angry for nothing and just wanted to violate family traditions and ruin the wedding. One way or another, but the ceremony took place. Kelly did not attend the event, citing employment. At the same time, in retaliation, the woman decided to mar the celebration and sent a sarcastic message to Olga, so the unsuspecting bride learned the truth. After that, the relationship between brother and sister became strained. Periodically between them there were altercations, often sounded mutual reproaches and insults, and the event that occurred afterward and completely knocked everyone out of the rut, a mysterious robbery. Joint life at the newlyweds began there in the Virgin Islands. During the honeymoon, the couple enjoyed marriage. Olga and Joseph sunbathed on the beach, swam in the sea, fished, rode on a yacht, and tried exotic cuisine. There was plenty of money for these purposes. Joe was proud that the business was booming and bringing in a tangible income, about $1 million a year. Back home, the newlyweds bought an expensive Mercedes car. The new convertible cost them $100,000. Since Olga did not belong to those women who are happy to sit on the neck of her husband, she began to help her husband. Olga was well-educated and well-read, well-versed in English, and also had an unprecedented charm. In addition, the past experience of working on the stock exchange came in handy. Therefore, she easily entered the business and engaged in administration. As soon as the lovely blonde took up the business, Joe and Chris had a lot more clients. A week before the attack near the condominium, someone broke into the home of a young family. While the couple were busy doing business, an unknown person stole jewelry and family heirlooms. The diamond ring was Olga's that day. After the Connell couple returned home, the head of the family noticed the illegal intrusion and called the police. Law enforcement officers examined the scene and surprisingly did not find any evidence. The search for the burglar yielded no solid results. Detectives put forward a version that the robbery was the result of someone staging or the work of a professional. That's why Kelly was under a lot of suspicion. As many believed, the sister had every reason to stage the crime. Perhaps over time, she could not forgive her brother for what he had done and decided to teach him a lesson. However, soon the investigation of the case came to a dead end. A more terrible crime happened to the spouses, and all the attention of detectives shifted to the investigation of a double crime. Search for motive. When detectives interviewed Kelly, she looked grief-stricken. The woman cooperated with the investigation and didn't hide anything. She told about the conflict with Joe and even showed correspondence about it. In one of the messages, Olga expressed the opinion that the recent robbery was organized by Kelly herself. However, Kelly denied it, but the investigation could not exclude her from the number of suspects, and, as the woman later admitted, exerted powerful pressure in some places. Despite the obvious motive, all the facts were to the contrary. At none of the interrogations did the victim's younger sister change her testimony, nor was she confused. During Joe and Olga's funeral, the sister looked broken. It was obvious that she loved her brother and was grieving the loss. At the same time, other versions of the murder were being considered. Joseph Connell belonged to the number of enviable grooms, and his wife was a rare beauty. Therefore, jealousy was not ruled out as a motive for the crime. Perhaps not everyone around the couple shared their happiness, and some of the former young people could hold a grudge, and after their marriage, to take revenge in life. However, the suspicions of detectives were not confirmed. During the investigation, it was found that Joe parted with his former companions on a good note. Moreover, they have long married and are happily married. This applies to Olga's past relationships as well. She divorced her Russian husband and cut off all contacts. However, an offended man would hardly take any measures to settle accounts with his ex-wife, and even more so, to travel a great distance across the ocean to do so. In this regard, this theory has been ruled out. Nevertheless, the search for enemies of newlyweds continued. At the same time, the investigators did not give rest to the subject of discord between brother and sister. Greed is a common reason for committing a crime. Therefore, after questioning Kelly, the investigation focused on Garrett Catalano, her husband. The man loved his wife very much and would do anything for her. It is likely that at the request of his beloved, he could have gone for a double crime. During the conversation, the potential suspect behaved calmly and convincingly. It turns out that he had a reliable alibi and also confirmed the innocence of his wife. However, Garrett expressed doubts that his brother-in-law made a multi-million-dollar fortune by honest labor. Catalano opaquely hinted that Joe may have been dealing in illegal substances. Over time, his words took hold. There were others who claimed that Joe was secretly selling steroids and making mad money from it. Secret witnesses identified another man we know as one of his associates. Thus, the detectives came upon a longtime friend and business partner, Christopher Rivers, best friend. Chris, unlike everyone around him, didn't seem to be worried about what had happened. he continued to lead his usual life. It was understandable that he had the double responsibility for the business. Meetings with suppliers, work with clients made him hold on, but still, his irrepressible vigor and strength of mind led to strange thoughts. One day, the investigators decided to talk to the man. He said that on the ill-fated night he was supposed to be present at the celebration, but could not show up because he was busy at work. Despite a long friendship and the premature death of his partner, Christopher unexpectedly spoke out unflatteringly. He said that Joseph had changed recently and was apparently unscrupulous. Rivers did not avoid Olga. Allegedly, he heard that the wife of Joe was not as simple as she wanted to seem and came to the U.S. to represent the interests of the Russian mafia. And a successful marriage only untied her hands. The words of the companion explained the high income of the family, but his suspicions needed careful verification. Perhaps everything the man said was just rumor and speculation, or maybe there was a good reason for it. However, Joseph's connection to the underworld soon became apparent. The information was not a secret and was publicly available. It turns out that a few years before meeting with Olga, her lover was accused of illegal possession of weapons, and even served a decent term for it. During his time in prison, the man managed to acquire new acquaintances. It is not excluded that after serving his sentence, local authorities pulled him into the trade in illegal substances. Perhaps over time, Connell crossed someone's path and they decided to take him out. But could the connections acquired behind bars have been the motive for the attack? The investigation was gathering momentum. While the detectives were working on the shady business, an interesting point came to light. Harry Cook, a well-known drug dealer, said he had heard Rivers make negative remarks about Joe on more than one occasion. Rivers accused his business partner of stealing. Chris Rivers admitted to him that he and his companion were selling illegal medical drugs through an auto parts store. But the buddy is greedy and distributes the profits unequally, while Chris is in greater need of money and has huge debts. And Joseph himself spends all the finances on an idle life. For this reason, Rivers joked that he wouldn't mind if his friend disappeared, and later seriously asked Harry if he wanted to help him in this, to which the latter replied no. Thus, the identity of Rivers appeared in a different light. In this regard, the investigation repeatedly questioned Chris. However, he had an alibi. At the time of the murder, the man was at home, which was confirmed by external and internal video surveillance cameras. At the same time, specialists decided to check his censures and studied the accounting documents of the firm. It turned out that, despite the large revenue, the business did suffer losses. However, as it turned out, numerous embezzlements have nothing to do with Connell. It was the stipulator himself who was responsible. Police informants reported that Chris has been using heavy substances for a long time, and lately his addiction has gotten out of control. This explains the numerous debts and shoplifting. Against this background, the man developed paranoia. That's why he repeatedly confessed to acquaintances that they want to kill him. In addition, it became known that he was personally involved in the sale of steroids, and Joe blindly believed his comrade and was in the dark about what was happening in front of his nose. In addition, Joe's attention turned to the new relationship. This information became known thanks to the information of a mysterious informant, a sick mind. Detectives came upon the man after examining Rivers' phone records. He was known to make a lot of phone calls on the night of September 23rd. Despite being at home at the time of the crime, his phone did not go silent. All calls were subsequently cleared from the device, but experts had no trouble reconstructing the story. Most of the calls belonged to Joshua, a former FBI informant. When police contacted Joshua, he admitted that he often used Rivers' services. One day, Chris Rivers made him a tempting offer, $65,000 for his companion's head. The big money undoubtedly attracted the man. However, Joshua did not want to participate in the case directly and found other hitmen. To this end, he turned to Dominic Benson and Aaron Thompson. Mercenaries cost him $5,000, which he received from the customer as an advance payment. Eventually, the confusing crime picture came to light. The best friend had sentenced his buddy and his spouse to a sad end. Was the motive behind the crime a grudge and a desire for sole ownership of a shared business? No. It was the $1 million that one of the partners was entitled to as an insurance payout. It turned out that long before the appearance of Olga, the former partners had secured the business and insured their lives. In the event of the death of one of them, the other received the amount to pay off the mortgage on the machine shop. If Joe died, the amount received would be enough to pay off all of Chris's debts. But here's the problem. His partner got married, and all payments were due to the legal spouse. So Rivers decided to take out two of them at once. The conversation that took place between the organizer and his accomplice on the night of the crime indirectly confirmed this. Although the communications between the men were encrypted, it was obvious that Rivers was concerned about the success of the operation. To better analyze the communication between the two men, detectives seized phones from the four suspects. Thanks to the mobile devices, their movements on the night of the crime were recorded. Dominic and Aaron were at that moment near the house of the young couple Connell. Curiously, the video footage that confirmed Chris's alibi played against him. The cameras show that the man is nervous and does not let the phone out of his hands. After detectives reached out to Joshua, he didn't put up a fight and surrendered to authorities. To mitigate his punishment, during the interrogation, the man agreed to a deal with the investigation and testified against the customer. Thus, Christopher came up with a cunning plan. He wanted to use the quarrel between his brother and sister to frame Kelly. During the investigation, it was proved that the robbery at the Connell house was the next stage of the criminal plot. Following Christopher's instructions, Joshua broke into the couple's home and burglarized it. However, the head of the target was a controversial family heirloom, a diamond ring. Coincidentally, Olga was wearing it that day. If the plan had succeeded, the investigation would have followed a false trail and blamed everything on Joe's sister. But this was not enough for Rivers, and after the crime, he tried to blacken the name of his friend. As it turned out later, the death of Joe and his lover was the result of a cold-blooded and carefully planned crime for money, justice. In 2014, Chris Rivers was indicted on several charges. He was charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder, 2 counts of possession of a firearm during the commission of a felony, as well as conspiracy in the first degree and solicitation of a felony in the first degree. His co-defendants were also tried. The trials took place separately but parallel to each other. During the trial, it was proven that Aaron Thompson was the one who held the weapon. He was therefore found guilty of 2 counts of first-degree murder, 2 counts of possession of a firearm during the commission of a felony, and first-degree conspiracy. The felon received 2 life sentences and plus 45 years. His buddy Dominic Benson was acquitted on the felony charge because he changed his mind about shooting at the last minute. Therefore, for first-degree conspiracy and aiding and abetting criminals, he received only 5 years in prison. Thanks to his active cooperation with the police for the murder conspiracy, Joshua got the same sentence. As for the main instigator of the crime, Chris Rivers, he was found guilty on all charges and sentenced to 2 life sentences plus 50 years. "We can forgive another person anything but success," goes the famous saying. Despite his young age, Joseph was a remarkable man. He built a business, found the love of his life, except that he was not left with the opportunity to enjoy happiness. Together, the couple could reach new heights, build a strong family, and have heirs. However, the thirst for profit and the dislike of his partner made irreparable adjustments to their measured life. Money, one of the old and common motives for crime. Christopher's pernicious addiction and greed ruined several lives. During his years in prison, the convict will surely be cured of his pernicious addiction to substances. But will he be able to stifle the guilt that is supposed to come with time? Unknown. Or maybe in his case, the voice of conscience will never be heard. After all, not everyone dares to spend the rest of his life in a constant struggle with himself. Truth is something that exists in reality and corresponds to the real state of affairs, but sometimes it is difficult to accept the truth, and a person creates a lie, which sincerely begins to believe and convince others. 11 young men and 1 girl met in a hotel room to celebrate the new year. Strange collaboration, you will think, and you will be right. But wait, there is one fact that will completely change your opinion. The men at this party are all members of a sexual minority, which means that 12 friends just met to have fun and celebrate the year 2021. And indeed, they celebrated the new year very cheerfully, so much so that on January 1st, the company had to take the only girl to the hospital, where doctors declared her death. But who was she? How did she die, and was anyone charged in connection with her death? But that's all in order. Next, let's break down the past party almost minute by minute. See what happened on the fateful night, and you'll definitely understand why we started this story with the notion of truth. So on December 31st, 2020, in Manila, the capital of the Philippines, at the 4-star City Garden Grand Hotel, John Paul de Lucerne checked in at 11 a.m. Christine de Serra checked in later, and during the day, 9 other guys checked into room 2207 and room 2209, which were on the same floor. Hotel manager John Paul Khalili joined the merry company just after midnight. New Year's Eve night was all about fun, dancing and alcohol, lots of alcohol. Rommel Galida woke up around 10 a.m. and noticed Christine sleeping in the bathtub. He covered her with a blanket and went back to sleep. When he woke up several hours later, he found her unconscious and beginning to turn blue. Christine was taken to the hospital by 3 friends and hotel staff, but upon arrival at the emergency room, doctors only pronounced her dead. The 11 guys with the only girl spent the entire night in the hotel room, and she was dead by morning. News headlines about the crime shocked the public. Everyone imagined the story the same way, because it was obvious what a group of young guys and 1 girl could do all night. But what really happened that New Year's Eve night, and from what Christine de Serra died, was to be solved by the investigation. Christine Angelica de Serra was born on April 13, 1997, into the well-to-do family of John Nestor de Serra and Sharon Rose Faba de Serra, and grew up in Barangay San Isidro, General Santos City. She grew up an outgoing, intelligent, and independent girl. Kristen was a loving sister to her 3 siblings, Monica, Chloe, and JJ. After graduating from high school, she moved to the larger and more promising city of Davao, on the shores of the bay of the same name. There she enrolled in university. Christine studied diligently, danced, modeled, and was active on social media. Christine was also the epitome of beauty and intelligence. In 2017, she graduated with honors from the University of the Philippines Mindanao in Davao City, where she earned a Bachelor of Arts in Communication Arts with a major in Media Arts. The girl has been actively involved in modeling and theatrical performances. On August 5, 2017, she competed against 8 other contenders for the title of Miss Silva Davao 2017 at the New City Commercial Corporation Mall in Davao City. She came in 2nd place. In June 2018, she participated in the annual fashion show. From September 2017 to January 2019, she worked as a marketing consultant for Gaisano Malls in different parts of Mindanao, including Davao City, General Santos City, Tagum, Toril, and Digos. Christine's life has been colorful and fulfilling. In February 2019, her life's dream came true. She moved to Manila to start working as a flight attendant for PAL Express, a subsidiary of Philippine Airlines. Christine de Serra's last flight as a flight attendant was on December 28, 2020. Christine's death was immediately publicized, due to which numerous discussions and theories were formed in the community. Initially, the police suspected that Kristen was most likely abused and killed by a group of guys she was partying with on New Year's Eve. Even without autopsy results and a toxicology report, Makati City Police filed preliminary charges of assault and murder against 11 men. The Philippine National Police declared the case closed. Arrests were made with charges and identification of suspects. 3 of the party participants were detained after surrendering to authorities on their own. But the main answer to what really caused Christine's death was the forensic medical report. The autopsy of Christine's body was conducted in Pasay City at the Rizal Funeral Home under the direction of Forensic Medical Officer Police Major Michael Nick Sartiento. On January 3, 2021, the examination of Christine de Serra's body was completed, and a forensic report was issued which found that death was due to natural causes due to a ruptured aortic aneurysm. However, it also mentioned bruises on the girl's right arm, right thigh, knees, ankles, and right foot, as well as a linear abrasion on her right thigh. Deeply healed lacerations and abrasions were also reported during the genital exam. The National Capital Region Police Department announced that a special investigation team had been set up to look into the case, but Christine's family was unwilling to accept the fact that a young, vibrant girl could die a natural death prematurely. At a press conference on January 5, 2021, Christine Dasser's family stated that they had seen the autopsy report that said she died of an aneurysm. However, they stated that the autopsy performed was incomplete and requested a second autopsy. The parents of the deceased have been trying to understand how Christine's aorta was ruptured. After all, the police and the Dasser family lawyer believed that the aneurysm was the result of assault or abuse, which means it was not a natural death, and the perpetrators should be punished. The prosecutor's office identified all of the 11 men who were with Christine throughout the night. Some of them were her co-workers. Other young men were friends of her friends whom Christine was meeting for the first time. It turned out that Christine was the initiator of this party. She had booked the hotel room herself a few days in advance and coordinated this party with her friends. Her mom, Sharon, was aware of her daughter's friendship with men and never opposed it. Since childhood, Kristen had found it easier to socialize and make friends with the male gender, so it was considered normal in their family. In addition, she and her friends usually did not go home for vacations, so it became a tradition for them to meet each other every year. Kristen was able to call her family just after midnight to inform them of the ongoing celebration at the Makati Hotel and to wish her family a happy new year. During the video call, the family could see Kristen's friends and the surrounding festive environment. However, there has been new speculation about the abuse allegation, so in the case, the main evidence of the incident became the frames of the video from the hotel lobby, the study of which helped the police almost minute by minute to reconstruct the picture of what happened. It should be noted that the party was to be held in room 2209. It was this room and booked Christine Dasser. The main events begin to unfold in the late afternoon. At 11:21 p.m., Christine leaves room 2209 and goes to room 2207. At 11:38 p.m., the company returns to their room. Christine goes last. She is holding her shoes in a glass. At 2:50 a.m., Christine, holding the hand of a new acquaintance, Valentine, goes to room 2207. While they are at a neighbor's house, a hotel employee brings an extra mattress to room 2209. At 2:52 a.m., Valentine accompanies Christine to her room. Valentine's gait shows that the girl is already quite drunk. Her gait is too relaxed, and she is holding a bottle in her hand. The friends stop at the door, and Christine suddenly kisses Valentine, but the man quickly pulls away, after which the couple goes inside. At 3:15 a.m., Christine hurriedly leaves her room and goes to her neighbor's room, and 6 minutes later, one of the guys leaves there. He heads to room 2209, presumably to call his friends. At 3:22 a.m., Christine Dasser can be seen chatting with another man in the next room on the right side of the hallway, while 2 other men walk past them. She looked upset. Suddenly, Christine hugs one of her friends, and then they disappear from the view of the cameras altogether. At 4:13 a.m., John de Lucerne can be seen carrying Christine back to the first room. At 4:22 a.m., the camera again captures Christine at the door of room 2207. It's unclear what brought her there again. She practically falls off her feet, and a guy who looks like John de Lucerne picks her up by the waist and carries her to room 2209. Christine looks pretty drunk. At 5:05 a.m., the camera captures Christine laughing as she runs away from a guy who looks like Louis de Lima. Afterward, they're standing outside room 2207. Christine looks normal, and with him she enters room 2209. At 6:23 a.m., Christine makes her last appearance on camera alive. For the last time, Valentine carries her in his arms from room 2207. The girl is conscious. It was obviously an eventful night. But the most important truth still remains behind the scenes. The party continued until dawn. Around 12 noon, when Christine was found unconscious in the bathtub, her friends carried her to the floor and repeatedly attempted cardiopulmonary resuscitation. After unsuccessful attempts, they called for help at the front desk. A few minutes later, the hotel manager and the head of security arrived in the room. They used a wheelchair to lower Christine to the first floor of the hotel. Rommel Galido accompanied Christine to the hospital. The doctors unfortunately only stated the girl's death. Rommel called Christine's mom and broke the bad news. It can be assumed that what is happening really looks like a fun party, and definitely to be in one room such a large company was cramped, so young people chaotically moved all night from room to room. But the investigators had suspicions about the use of illegal substances to enhance the effect of alcohol. When questioned, some of the detainees claimed that there were no illegal substances during the party, but only whiskey and tequila. It is worth noting that illegal drugs were initially the centerpiece of the investigation, as the testimony of one of the detainees reported that Christine had doubts about the contents of the drinks and suggested that someone may have spiked it with an unknown substance. It transpired that guests were asked to bring their own food and drinks. Because of this, there was speculation that Christine Dassera's drink was poisoned and could have triggered the aneurysm that eventually led to her death. But the autopsy report stated that no alcohol or illegal drugs taken the night before her death would cause this type of aortic dilatation or defect. Substance information was later unconfirmed, as no illegal substances or traces of them were found in the room or in the suspect's personal belongings. An examination and search of the two rooms, as well as the neighboring room 2009, looking for potential evidence, did not yield the desired results that at least indirectly proved the violent death of Christine de Serna. Under questioning, Mark Rosales and John de la Serna publicly admitted their unconventional orientation and stated that Christine was their best friend and they would never hurt her. John also revealed that they had to bring Christine back from room 2207 because she was already vomiting early in the morning. Rommel Galido said that around 10 a.m. he found Christine in the bathtub of their room and thought she was asleep, so he just covered her with a blanket. However, around noon, after he woke up and went back to wake her up, he realized the girl was blue and not breathing. He rushed to his friends for help. The hotel advised that she be rushed to Makati Medical Center, where she was pronounced dead on arrival, reportedly due to a ruptured aortic aneurysm. The hospital reported the death to the Makati City Police. Meanwhile, other men from a neighboring hotel room had left by then. On January 4th, the Philippine National Police sent a separate statement to the media about the Christine Dacer incident, saying that the case is almost solved despite some missing details and conflicting reports on the matter. Police Chief Debold Sinas said they already have 3 suspects, and they have been apprehended. Other suspects were being sought. But as early as January 6th, the Makati City Prosecutor's Office ordered the release of the 3 men who were in custody due to lack of evidence. Prosecutors insisted that the evidence presented was insufficient to establish that Christine was abused. They also said that even if Christine Dacer was abused, the police have yet to prove that this is what caused her death. Moreover, the party was a gathering of men of non-traditional orientation where they were all flirting with each other, and Christine was an extra woman. Rommel Galido, as well as most of those present at the party, were stewards and co-workers of Christine Dacera at PL Airlines, indicating that she was well acquainted with these men and their orientation. On January 13, 2021, the Makati City Prosecutor's Office launched a preliminary investigation and based on an official autopsy that confirmed that the 23-year-old died from a ruptured aortic aneurysm. The prosecutor's office also called on the police to release the results of the victim's DNA analysis, toxicology report, and histopathic study. However, Christine's mother, Sharon Dacera, criticized the report that her daughter was not abused. She appeared on a news show where she claimed that her daughter was abused by a group of guys. If you see Christine's body, if you're a mother, You'll probably feel the pain that Christine suffered because of them, but my daughter can't talk anymore because she's dead." The woman spoke out on the TV program. Sharon cited the lacerations and bruises on her daughter's body, which were not recorded in the autopsy, as evidence that the report was inaccurate. Christine's family later said they wanted another autopsy to challenge authorities' initial findings that she died a natural death. The basis was injuries and bruising that were not documented in the first report. Family spokesperson Brick Reyes said that the injuries on the victim's legs and arms, as well as her remains, would provide sufficient evidence that Christine was abused. Brick Reyes also said that they believe the young woman was drugged and abused before she died. Christine was already intoxicated and complained that something seemed to have been spiked in her drink during the New Year's Eve celebration. Christine's parents said they have filed a complaint demanding the immediate dismissal of Michael Nick Sarmiento for gross negligence and gross incompetence in preparing Christine's forensic report and death certificate. Dr. Marissy Ramos, a friend of Dasser's family, told reporters that the body was subjected to a second autopsy. He also emphasized that the biological fluids recovered from the second autopsy have been forwarded to the Death Investigation Unit, which will provide more details after a final evaluation and consolidation of all the findings of its forensic team. The pathology autopsy results from the Southern Police District Crime Lab Division's forensic report, which was eventually shared on social media, showed that the cause of death was consistent with what was previously reported as a ruptured aortic aneurysm. The official autopsy revealed that Christina was not abused on the night of her death. The actual cause of Dassera's death lies in the aorta. The constant increase in blood pressure in the aorta caused the defect to weaken, and eventually the aorta ruptured, the Philippine National Police Crime Lab report said. At the time the aorta rupture occurred, there was blood loss, so Christine felt various symptoms such as weakness, nausea, and sweating. The blood loss due to the aortic rupture killed her within a few hours, the report said. This means that the girl had a ruptured aortic aneurysm, which enlarged the lower part of the main vessel, aorta, that supplies blood to the entire body. This vessel runs from a person's heart through the chest and abdomen. Since the aorta is the largest vessel in the body, if it ruptures, a person can lose a huge amount of blood and potentially be fatal, as in this case. In addition, it was noted that Christine's aneurysm did not occur recently. It started a long time ago. The report states that dilatation is a chronic condition and was present long before her death. Had she not died that fateful night, she would still have died in any scenario that would cause her blood pressure to rise enough to rupture the aneurysm. The autopsy also revealed that Dassera's heart was enlarged compared to a healthy heart, further confirming Christina Dassera's undiagnosed hypertension. For the most part, it can be confirmed that the girl's death was due to natural causes. But the widespread misinformation brought shame and persecution to those 11 young guys who were at the party and sincerely tried to give Christine first aid, but they were labeled as criminals. All 11 guys who were charged preliminarily have since been released from custody. The Makati City Prosecutor's Office tried to rectify the situation and said that at the time of the publicity, the evidence presented was not enough to establish that Christine Dassera was abused, and it was impossible to obtain proper evidence at that time. Therefore, they had to build a version based on signs of deterioration of the victim's body. In addition, 2 other suspects said that the police forced them to give false testimony that there were illegal drugs at the New Year's Eve party. Another participant in the story explained his kiss with Christine, which was captured by surveillance cameras on the eve of her death. According to the man, it was Christine herself who initiated it. He, however, tried to push her away. Law enforcement officials were criticized for not conducting a thorough toxicological examination when the flight attendant's body was found. The charges against the men were later dropped due to lack of evidence. The death of Christine Dassera attracted widespread media attention as a result of suspicious circumstances that seemed to contradict the findings of the Philippine National Police. Christine's case continued to receive a lot of publicity online as further developments came from her family. who in no way could accept the truth and believe in the natural death of their daughter. The girl's mother, Sharon, appealed to President Rodrigo Duterte for help in seeking justice for her daughter. "I am an ordinary person. You also have a daughter. I want to speak out openly because I don't want anyone to be victimized by the kind of cruelty and barbarism like my Christine." Christine Dacara was buried at Forest Lake Memorial Park in her hometown of General Santos, more than a week after her death. A wave of condolences, reposts, and farewells traveled across the social stanzas of Kristen's friends and co-workers. Ultimately, the unconventional case of Kristen Dacara serves as a prime example of when the media spreads misinformation and how it can affect the public as well as impact those involved. As we come to the end, the story wants to return to the truth, which sooner or later, but in any form, is bound to take its place of honor. After all, the truth is one. But Christine's family is still convinced that the girl was killed by these people and that there is something secret in this story. Personally, I do not understand and found no answers to the question about bruises and wounds on Christine's body. Why was it hushed up? It seems that despite the presence of wounds and bruises on Christine's body, the cause of her death was not them, but the rupture of the aorta due to heart disease, so they did not focus on the wounds on her body. In my opinion, there are a lot of oddities and inconsistencies in this case, but you guys are the judge. I would like to wish Christine's family to accept the irreparable loss, because young guys, whether they are guilty or not, will end up remembering the same sad story every New Year's Eve and making excuses for the rest of their lives. The Beverly Liggett case, madness by inheritance, when a favorite son becomes an executioner. Genetics, unfortunately, is inextricably linked to many diseases that are inherited. These include some mental disorders. However, even an existing predisposition is only a risk and probability, but not a guarantee that the child will inherit this or that ailment. Naturally, every parent hopes that the children will take from him only the best, and diseases will bypass offspring. Many experts say that there are no specific genes for the transmission of mental illness. That is, no one gene is necessary or sufficient to provoke the disease. Nevertheless, mental illness tends to run in families. This is exactly the problem faced by our heroine today, Beverly Liggett, who sincerely believed that her children would not be affected by such an affliction. And indeed, Beverly's daughter grew up a perfectly healthy and balanced woman, but the son, apparently, took a double blow in which he blamed solely on his mother. It should be noted that the presence of a mental disorder did not affect the intelligence of this guy. On the contrary, he was very clever and calculating, from which the atrocities committed by him look even more sickeningly creepy. Who is Beverly Liggett? Beverly Liggett was born on the 1st of October 1956 in the capital of Colorado, a picturesque metropolis called Denver. She was raised with her older brother Stephen and sister Martha in an ordinary family of Barbara and Edwin Liggett, who lived all their lives in their hometown, almost never leaving its boundaries. After graduating from high school, Beverly went to a local college, but here she could not go to university for a variety of reasons, partly related to her health. In her youth, the girl worked as a salesman, but after she married at the age of 26 and gave birth to 2 children, she devoted herself to her family for many years and was exclusively engaged in raising heirs and creating a home. In 1988, Beverly had a long-awaited firstborn son, Ari, and a few years later, a daughter, Libby, was born. The young woman literally did not care about her heirs and lived for them. However, in the second half of the 90s, her marriage broke up. The husband left the family, moved to another state, and was no longer interested in the fate of his ex-wife and did not take any part in the lives of children. Beverly was forced to take 2 jobs at once, but thanks to her diligence and determination, the family of 3 did not need anything. She and her children moved to the suburbs of Denver, a small and relatively young, founded in 2001 town centennial, where they rented a cozy, spacious house. In the mid-2000s, Beverly, on one of the dating sites, met a man named Seth Missy, with whom they had a correspondence, which grew into a romantic relationship. It was he who inspired her lover to finally fulfill her dream and pursue higher education. Liggett chose medical school because she always dreamed of helping other people and felt that in this lies her calling. At that time, she was already over 50 years old, and in the group she was twice as old as her fellow students. However, she easily found a common language with them and is remembered by all as sociable, attentive, and responsible miniature brunette who was nicknamed Caring Angel. Beverly and Seth's romance lasted about 5 years before the couple decided to officially legalize their relationship. For both of them, the step was a serious one, but they were ready for it. Beverly was happy, as she finally had a college degree, had a better paying job, and was about to marry the man she loved. Her children were old enough by then to be on their own, but her son Ari was a source of genuine anxiety and apprehension, and there were a number of good reasons for that. A hereditary disease. There was a sensitive issue in the Liggett family that they tried hard to hide from others and never discussed with outsiders. The fact that Beverly and her sister Martha from an early age suffered from bipolar affective disorder, which is characterized by frequent changes in mood phases, from manic to depressive. From time to time, the disorder was exacerbated. But if Martha experienced minor discomfort associated with this disorder, and the prescribed medication quickly gave positive results, Beverly sometimes needed hospital treatment because she was on the verge of voluntarily taking her own life. It was for this reason that she was unable to go to university in her time, and for the same reason the marriage with the father of her children broke up. It is also worth noting that her mother, Barbara too, was subject to prolonged depression, but she faced this problem in the 40s, and then the woman no one in time did not provide qualified help, and so she was forced to fight her illness on her own for almost all her life. Beverly was sure that the mental disorder in their family is transmitted exclusively through the female line because the disease manifested itself in her mother, her and her sister, while her brother Stephen remained completely normal. In this regard, Beverly feared for the health of her daughter Libby, but just the daughter of the disease bypassed, hitting with redoubled force on Ari, the special child. From early childhood, Ari was a rather strange, withdrawn boy prone to tantrums. At the age of 5, he was diagnosed with autism, and later a whole host of other mental disorders and abnormalities were added. He could withdraw into himself, and completely abstracted from what was going on around him. But such states, as a rule, alternated with attacks of aggression. Despite his mental problems, Ari went to a normal high school, where he studied quite well. Particularly easy to give him the exact sciences. In particular, he was fond of chemistry and physics. The boy easily solved complex problems, and most calculations were made in his mind. His intelligence was above average, but his social and communication skills were practically absent. Classmates avoided the strange and unsociable peer, or simply mocked him. Ari had no friends at all, was not eager to learn about the world around him, was aggressive and violent, which manifested itself in cruelty to animals and attacks on other children. The boy was repeatedly hospitalized and prescribed medication to correct his condition, but at home he usually stopped taking the prescribed medication and soon returned to his previous state. His parents tried to control him to take the necessary pills, but the older he got, the more difficult it was to do so. He did not know how to ask or talk calmly, and he always got what he wanted with tantrums. The boy could shut himself in and not talk to anyone for weeks, but could talk for hours to himself or to some imaginary interlocutor. In periods of aggravation, he became dangerous to others, and his relatives sometimes insisted on his compulsory hospitalization. A dangerous teenager. As a teenager, Ari learned that his mother, aunt, and grandmother also suffered from mental health problems, and his mother had to be hospitalized at times. During that period, Ari literally hated his mother and blamed her for all of his troubles. He believed that she had awarded him with a disease that was ruining his life. The young man became increasingly uncontrollable. He threatened his loved ones with violence and constantly wondered why his own sister, family curse, bypassed. Being with him under the same roof was becoming unsafe, and the first could not stand the head of the family. He filed for divorce and literally escaped. Despite his diagnosis, Ari was easily able to enter the university, receiving a high passing score. However, the guy was expelled in his first year after he brought a homemade firearm to the institution and threatened a fellow student with death. At that time, he was arrested for the first time, but only got off with an educational talk, confiscation of the weapon, and expulsion from the university. About a year later, the police were contacted by Beverly and asked to come to their home immediately to subdue her son, who was threatening to kill her and her daughter, and appeared to be very serious. But the police handed the violent young man into the hands of psychiatrists, and those, after a short treatment in the hospital, released him home, prescribing medication, which Ari, of course, did not take. Hateful stepfather. Ari was 18 years old when Beverly met Seth and began dating him. Soon the couple decided to live together, but Ari, from the very beginning, took his mother's new chosen one in the bayonet. He tried in every possible way to get him out of the house, threatened, scandalized, and even started fights. The appearance of another man in the house young man perceived as a personal insult and betrayal by his mother. Seth, as best he could, tried to support his beloved. He looked for specialists who could help the young man, paid for his treatment in clinics, but the more he tried, the more Ari hated him. The very thought of this man becoming his stepfather and part of their family frightened and depressed Ari, making him aggressive and dangerous. Seth Missy repeatedly told his wife that her son was old enough to live on his own. He could study or work and be like everyone else if he took his medication properly. Beverly Liggett herself was well aware of this, but she loved her son and could not leave him or kick him out, so she continued to endanger her own life. Obsession with guns. As time went on, the young man's hobbies became more and more bizarre, sophisticated, and dangerous. He had a weakness for weapons, and to be more precise, was literally obsessed with them. In the basement of his own house, he collected homemade firearms literally from improvised materials, as they say, on his knees, which once again proved that the guy was very smart, clever, and enterprising. But Ari was not limited to one weapon and got the idea to create an explosive device. He found all the information he was interested in on the internet, bought or ordered the components he needed, and the substances he couldn't get. He decided to synthesize at home himself, using his deep knowledge of chemistry. The mother found her son in the backyard of the house. Beverly was suspicious, and since her son did not answer questions and behaved strangely, she immediately called the police. As it turned out, she did it in time, because during the search, the police found in the house almost ready bomb. In addition, they found and confiscated a modified rifle, several pistols assembled from parts of different models, a silencer, and a lot of spare parts for weapons. When Ari's computer search history for the past few months was reviewed and studied, the FBI became seriously interested in the young man, as they suspected that he was preparing a large-scale crime. In addition, in Ari's room on the shelves were numerous jars of poisonous substances, including arsenic and potassium cyanide. He himself could not clearly explain why he had purchased them. The young man was arrested the same day, but was only charged with a misdemeanor possession of weapons and careless handling of dangerous chemicals that could cause death or serious injury. But Ari pleaded guilty, cooperated with the investigation, and received only a 1-year suspended sentence, after which he returned to his home, where he again began to terrorize his mother, sister, and Seth. The threat of reprisals and the indifference of the medical profession. After his arrest and suspended sentence, Ari literally went mad with anger and hatred. Not a day went by that he didn't threaten to kill his family in their sleep or burn down their house after locking everyone in there. Then Ari was hospitalized again and spent about 3 months in the walls of a psychiatric hospital. Doctors, in addition to earlier diagnoses, revealed signs of schizophrenia and acute psychosis in the young man. After another course of treatment, the young man became quiet for a while and went into himself again. He did not talk to anyone, spent most of his time in his room at his computer, and seemed to take his prescribed medication faithfully. But only a month later, he had another breakdown, which was triggered by the news of his mother and Seth's upcoming wedding. Ari also overheard Ari talking about his mother and stepfather, planning to buy their own house in another state, move there, and start their lives over. Libby's sister had already moved out with her boyfriend, which meant Ari would be on his own. The 25-year-old guy was not happy about it. The young man literally went crazy. He threw his mother a tantrum, screamed, waved a knife in front of her, threatened to kill her and make sure that the body would never be found. Beverly immediately called the psychiatric hospital, told them everything, and asked for her son to be forcibly hospitalized again. But the attending physician was dismissive of her request, believing that there was no reason to do so, and that the last course of treatment had yielded positive results, so that Ari, in his opinion, did not pose a threat to others. That same evening, Beverly had one last conversation with Seth, who was in another city for work, and was unable to come to her immediately. Beverly's mysterious disappearance. On the 14th of October 2012, less than 2 weeks after the woman celebrated her 56th birthday, she mysteriously disappeared. She failed to turn up for hospital duty that day, something that had never happened before. Colleagues were the first to sound the alarm. After failing to call his lover and receiving no response to his numerous messages, Seth dialed Libby's number to find out when she had last spoken to her mother. As it turned out, Libby had also been trying to call her unsuccessfully since morning. Seth called the house phone, and what he heard horrified him. The phone was picked up by Ari, who unsuccessfully tried to copy his mother's voice, pretending to be her and claiming that she was fine. Seth immediately contacted the police and asked them to send a unit to their home as soon as possible. However, when the police arrived, they found that no one was home, and they could not find a good reason to break in at that time. Therefore, the only attempts made that day were to trace Beverly's phone signal and check her bank card activity. Since Beverly's car was also missing, it was put on a statewide manhunt, and it was the vehicle that led to a lead just 2 days later, when a patrolman spotted it in a Denver suburb and decided to check the paperwork and see if it was the right car. A creepy find in the boot. The car seemed strange to the police officer even before he checked the license plate number and made sure it belonged to the missing woman. When the last doubts were gone, the police officer approached the driver and asked for identification. The driver was a young man with long hair that partially covered his face. He was visibly nervous, and when he was asked to show his documents again, he simply pushed the throttle to the floor, sped off, and sped down the road at full speed. The police officer began to chase the fugitive and radioed for backup. But just a couple of minutes later, while trying to make a sharp turn at high speed, the car skidded, went off the road, and hit a tree. The driver was wearing a seatbelt, and the airbags deployed, leaving him unharmed. Ari tried to run away, but was thrown to the ground by police officers as soon as he left the vehicle. On examining the vehicle, the police found several large, sealed plastic containers in the boot of the vehicle, which they opened to their shock and horror. Inside were fragments of a dismembered female body, covered with a strange-smelling, murky liquid. The interrogation and the killer's attempts to evade responsibility. Once Ari was brought to the station for questioning, he stated that he had schizophrenia, autism, psychosis, and bipolar affective disorder, as his psychiatrist could confirm. He also added that he was unable to distinguish between right and wrong because of his diagnoses, so he did not know what he was doing. He then asked whether he would be tried if his diagnoses were confirmed and what punishment he would face. Ari categorically refused to plead guilty. During interrogations, he would call himself a god or claim that he was possessed by demons and needed the help of an exorcist. At times, Ari's speech became incoherent, as if he began to talk to an invisible interlocutor, completely ignoring the police. The psychiatric examination confirmed that the accused indeed suffers from a number of mental disorders, but at the same time, it was proved that he is quite able to give an account of his actions. Also during the interrogations, the psychiatrist who observed the guy's behavior concluded that even when talking to himself, he always listened attentively to what was being said to him and what questions were being asked. This was evident from his reactions, clarifications, and sudden mood swings. The main reason why Ari was so vividly and demonstratively showing his insanity was an attempt to avoid severe punishment and minimize his responsibility before the law. He was clever and intelligent enough, so he tried to confuse the investigation and convince others of his insanity. The investigation and the unexpected results of the search. Despite the fact that from the very beginning, no one doubted that Ari had committed a terrible crime, his guilt had to be proved, and this required hard evidence. It was decided to start with a search in their family home, where, as expected, the murder took place. There, the police found washed-up traces of blood on the kitchen floor, in the corridor, and in the bathroom. In the dishwasher lay a bloody hacksaw, which the young man had apparently used to cut up his mother's body. The place for this gruesome act was the bathtub, which had numerous jagged chips on its edges. The expert examination showed that Beverly was poisoned with potassium cyanide, and after her death, her body was dismembered with a hacksaw and packed into containers. Vials with the said poisonous substance were found in the kitchen, in Ari's room, as well as in the basement of the house, where the guy had a kind of chemical laboratory. In addition, in his bedroom, under the bed was found the corpse of Beverly's favorite cat, which was also poisoned with poison. This suggested that the perpetrator first practiced on the animal before killing the mother. By the way, remember the strange liquid in which the fragments of the dismembered body were placed? As it turned out, it had a special chemical composition which is able to accelerate the process of decomposition of tissue. Ari found the recipe on the internet and decided to literally dissolve the corpse and hide the bones in the mountains so that they would never be found. A picture of the crime and the killer's justification. Based on all the evidence found, the following picture of the massacre emerged. On the eve of the tragedy, Ari had a big row with his mother and threatened to kill her again. He was so convincing that Beverly, seriously afraid for her life, called her son's psychiatrist with a request to immediately hospitalize him. However, the specialist ignored the request, believing that his patient was not dangerous to others. In the evening, the young man, having previously tested the effects of the poison on a cat, poisoned his mother, took her body to the bathroom, and began to cut it up with a hacksaw. How he got his mother to take potassium cyanide remains a mystery to this day. It probably took Ari all night to complete the gruesome job because in the morning, when Seth called the house phone, the perpetrator was still in the house. Ari then carelessly cleaned up the blood, stuffed the saw into the dishwasher, and packed the body into several containers filled with chemicals. He took the containers to the boot of his mother's car, which he used to leave the house. The further events are already known to you. When this version was presented to the defendant, supported by hard evidence, he suddenly began to justify himself and change his testimony. Ari stated that his mother took her own life by taking the poison voluntarily, and he only found her lifeless body. According to the guy, he was greatly afraid that he would be left without means of subsistence, as he himself did not work and lived at her expense. Then he decided to get rid of the body so that she would be considered missing. According to his plan, he himself was to remain living in the house and could continue to use the deceased's bank cards and accounts. The young man's story sounded wild and crazy. There was no doubt in anyone's mind that he was mentally ill, but it was also obvious that he had carefully planned the crime in advance. It was not a temporary insanity, a state of affect, or a fit of aggression. He had thought out every step and acted accordingly to the plan. One of the main evidences that the crime was pre-planned was Ari's possession of chemicals accelerating decomposition of the body, which he had purchased in advance. Moreover, according to his search history, he had studied them in detail months before the crime, the trial, and sentence. As I have already said, the psychiatric examination confirmed Ari's diagnoses, but the experts gave an unequivocal conclusion that he was aware of his actions and had carefully prepared in advance for the massacre of his mother. He himself continued to insist on his insanity, although he realized that it was useless to feign insanity. The trial took place in November of the same year, a month and a half after the crime that shook the entire state. Lawyers desperately tried to prove that the defendant cannot be criminally responsible because of his illness and needs treatment. Ari himself claimed that his mother hated him, so passed the hereditary disease to him, while his sister was completely normal. He also called himself a victim of crazy Beverly and blamed his parent for all his troubles. Seth appeared in court as a witness and said that his late lover, and he himself, frankly afraid of Ari because they did not know what to expect from him. He was incredibly cruel to others, showed sadistic tendencies, and refused to take prescribed medication to suppress outbursts of aggression. He also added that Beverly's fear for her son had transformed into her fear of her own son. The court found Irene Liggett guilty of first-degree premeditated murder and sentenced him to life in prison without the possibility of ever being eligible for parole. The jury unanimously found his actions to be cold-blooded and calculated. The 26-year-old defendant listened to his verdict in silence, his head down, and seemingly unconcerned. Libby Liggett, after the trial, admitted that she believed her brother was 100% guilty of what he had done. But at the same time, she noted that, perhaps, the tragedy could have been avoided if the specialists to whom the family repeatedly turned for help conscientiously performed their duties and in time to respond to the alarming messages Beverly. As of today, Irene Liggett is serving his life sentence in a Colorado state prison. All of his attempts to appeal and challenge the court's decision have been rejected. Australia is one of the most magical places on Earth. It's the smallest continent, a land of eternal summer with unique flora and fauna. Its very location is unique. Australia is the only country in the world that occupies an entire continent. Many people dream of this enchanting country, isolated from the rest of the world, as a place to chase their dreams. But in our story, one grand dream was not meant to come true. On March 5, 2021, Jasmine Corr finished her work shift and headed to the car park. A young man approached her and called her aside. Jasmine knew him, so she followed without fear. The next moment, he grabbed her by the neck with his strong hand and forcefully placed her in a nearby car. Jasmine resisted. She tried to scream and asked to be let go, but the choking pressure on her neck cut off her oxygen. She went limp, and the abductor placed her in the car. He hurriedly got behind the wheel and drove away. 18-year-old Jasmine came to Australia from India in pursuit of her dream. After her father's tragic death, she dreamed of becoming a nurse to help people. She wanted to obtain a quality medical education. With her mother's blessing, she joyfully accepted her aunt and uncle's offer to move to Australia. Thus, she settled in Adelaide with her close relatives and successfully enrolled in university. Studying was hard due to the heavy workload, but Jasmine was persistent and goal-oriented, never straying from her dream. She never missed a lecture, read mountains of textbooks, and helped her classmates with notes. Thanks to her perseverance, she earned the respect of her professors and became a role model for her peers. Jasmine Corr's relentless determination not only allowed her to study, but also to find a job to gain practical experience. 2 years into her studies, Jasmine Corr landed a student nurse position at the Southern Cross Homes Hospital in Plympton North, a suburb of Adelaide. At a university social event, Jasmine met Tarakjot Singh. The two quickly struck up a friendship. Both being from India, they had a lot in common to talk about. Tarakjot Singh came from an ordinary Indian family. After finishing school with flying colors, he aimed for a better education and moved to Australia to pursue a bachelor's degree in information technology. A kind and empathetic young man, he studied hard and worked to afford a comfortable living in the bustling city. The young people spent a lot of time together, hanging out at work and catching up at cafes between university lectures. Over time, their friendship blossomed into a romantic relationship. By April 2020, the young couple was no longer hiding their relationship and started planning a future together. Jasmine was smitten with Tarakjot's attention and care. He continuously expressed his devotion and love. Initially, it seemed like he was just very caring, but gradually his attentiveness became more intrusive. Tarakjot started inquiring about Jasmine's every move, justifying it by saying he was concerned for her well-being. Secretly, he began checking whom she was interacting with on social media, and then started demanding reports on her every step. Jasmine felt that Tarakjot's behavior had crossed all boundaries, but he managed to convince her every time that his total control was purely out of love and care. He would apologize and promise not to invade her personal space without reason, but these were just empty promises. Over time, Jasmine felt increasingly suffocated in her relationship with Tarakjot. He strongly opposed her interactions with family and friends. This isolation deeply hurt her, leading Jasmine to make a crucial decision to end the relationship and free herself from the pressure. With her family's support, Jasmine informed Tarakjot that she was ending their relationship. He reacted with fury, screaming, cursing, and threatening retribution against her family. Jasmine was emotionally drained. She took leave and went to stay with her mother in India. But even there, Tarakjot did not leave her alone. From afar, he used emotional blackmail, threatening to end his life. Tarakjot took drastic measures to capture his ex-girlfriend's attention. At one point, he attempted to end his life by consuming several packs of sleeping pills, recording the act and sending the video to Jasmine, hoping to elicit pity and compassion. However, his plan backfired, and instead of winning her back, he ended up in the hospital under medical care. After receiving the necessary therapy, Tarakjot returned to his job and studies. It appeared he had accepted the breakup with Jasmine and started a new life without her. But on March 6, 2021, Jasmine Kaur did not show up for work. As evening fell and darkness enveloped the streets, a car swiftly made its way through the city, adeptly avoiding surveillance cameras. After an hour's drive, the car came to a stop. The young man exited and helped the girl out. She was weak from the prolonged lack of oxygen. With cold efficiency, he retrieved tape and a cable from the trunk. Without a word, and with brute cruelty, he sealed her mouth and eyes with the tape, causing her eyelashes to stick together and pulling tightly on the delicate skin of her face. Then, the man tied her hands behind her back. She writhed in fear. Silence. There was nowhere to run. He pushed her, and when she fell, he tied her legs with the same cable. The victim moaned and squirmed on the dusty road. Her long, dark hair tangled, and her clothes became dirty. After binding her legs, he grabbed her hair and with a swift slash cut across her throat. The victim went silent. He placed the knife in a bag and carelessly lifted the immobilized girl off the ground into the trunk. Closing the lid, he lit a cigarette. He took a few puffs before getting back into the car to continue his drive. He drove through the evening and all night. Only in the early morning did his car stop at Death's Peak. The man dug a shallow grave, removed the victim from the trunk, and laid her in the ground. Thus, the young woman was buried alive by her abductor. But she was still alive. Her eyes didn't see the horror of her situation. Lying in the cold earth, trying to breathe, her nostrils filled with fine sand, the weight of the soil pressing down on her, she was unable to move. Fear and the realization of complete helplessness took over her mind. She could only moan, briefly, then she fell asleep, forever. So easily and simply, one person decided they had the right to determine another's fate. But evil must and will be punished. On March 6, 2021, Jasmine Kaur did not show up for work at the Southern Cross Care elderly home in North Plimpton, where she worked as a nurse without any prior warning. Her supervisor contacted her family. On the same day, she was declared missing. A search began. Surveillance footage from that evening was reviewed, but there was nothing that could aid the investigation in finding Jasmine Kaur. The last time the young nursing student was seen was leaving her job at Southern Cross Homes in Plimpton North around 10 p.m. on March 5th. Tarakjot Singh quickly became the prime suspect with a motive, especially since Jasmine had filed a harassment complaint against him with the police just weeks before her disappearance. When first questioned by police on March 6th, Singh claimed he couldn't remember the last time he saw Jasmine Kaur and insisted he was at home on the night of her death. The following day, Singh informed the officers that Jasmine had taken her own life and that he had buried her in the Flinders Ranges. He led the police to the burial site, where they discovered Jasmine's shoes, glasses, and work ID badge in a trash bin, along with zip ties. She was exhumed 2 days after Tarakjot Singh was interrogated by the police at Morialta Creek, 40 kilometers north of Hawker, approximately 100 meters from the road and nearly a 5-hour drive from the location he allegedly took her. Tarakjot Singh was arrested and held in custody pending trial. Investigators determined that in the days leading up to her disappearance, Tarakjot Singh had meticulously prepared for the abduction and death of the young woman. It was found that on the day of the kidnapping, Singh had purchased zip ties, tape, and rope from a hardware store. Searches conducted at the residence where Karakjot lived uncovered several SIM cards and phones, proving that he had carefully planned the abduction, even going as far as changing his SIM card to fabricate an alibi. On the night of the abduction, Singh switched cars with his apartment neighbor and asked him to cover his shift, then headed to the elderly home where Jasmine was working that day. Initially, Singh was charged with failing to report a death to the coroner before the charge was upgraded to homicide. Following the investigation, 21-year-old Tarakjot Singh from Karalta Park was charged with the homicide of 21-year-old Jasmine Kaur after her body was found buried at Morialta Creek. Singh first appeared via video link before the Port Augusta Magistrates Court on March 9th, where Judge Gregory Fisher ordered the accused's name and face to be withheld for 30 days. In July 2021, hearings in the Jasmine Court case began under Judge Adam Kimber in the Supreme Court. It emerged during the hearings that Singh was in Australia on a student visa and had spent time in a short-term psychiatric ward that year. Prosecutors told the Supreme Court that 21-year-old Jasmine Kaur was assassinated a month after she reported her ex-partner Karakjot Singh for stalking her. Singh pleaded guilty to the of Jasmine Kaur in March 2021, and the details of his crime were outlined during the sentencing. Prosecutor Carmen Mateo stated that Jasmine Kaur endured absolute terror after Singh abducted her from her workplace in Adelaide on March 5, 2021. The court heard Jasmine Kaur suffered an extraordinary level of cruelty after her former boyfriend kidnapped her, bound her with tape and zip ties, and buried her alive with her eyes bound and conscious at Death's Peak, near Hawker in the Flinders Ranges. Evidence provided by the pathologist who conducted Jasmine's autopsy indicated that Singh made superficial cuts to her throat, but these did not cause her death. An autopsy report presented showed Jasmine Kaur died on March 6, 2021, several hours after being buried. Horrific details emerged during the sentencing at the Supreme Court. Prosecutor Carmen Mateo stated she had to be acutely aware of her hopeless situation, and she must have consciously suffered from what can only be described as absolute terror. Mateo also mentioned that the act was inefficient, and Jasmine Kaur was made to suffer. It is unknown when her throat was cut, unknown when and how she ended up in that grave or was placed there, and unknown when she was dug out, other than the accusation suggests that it must have happened while she was still alive and being prepared for burial. During the initial investigation into Jasmine Kaur's death, Tarakjot denied any wrongdoing, continuously asserting that she took her own life. However, Judge Adam Kimber stated that Singh prepared a series of calculated steps over a certain period of time to commit the crime. Prosecutor Carmen Mateo informed the court that Miss Kaur had filed a police report claiming that Tarakjot Singh was stalking her on February 9th, about a month before she was assassinated. She said that Singh began cold and clinical planning of Miss Kaur's death after their relationship ended. The manner in which Jasmine Kaur was murdered indeed involved an extraordinary level of cruelty, she added. Martin Anders, the attorney representing Singh's interests, stated that 2 months before the tragic incident, the Singh and Kaur families had a meeting that resulted in a negative decision regarding the continuation of their relationship. He also mentioned that Singh's reasoning was seriously impaired following the end of their relationship. This is not someone who was really well-grounded in terms of understanding what desires were at play, how these issues evolved, and how he might have properly reasoned in the circumstances he faced. The lawyer explained, he took actions that destroyed not only her life, but his own. Martin Anders commented on Singh's deteriorating mental health and is experiencing hallucinations following Jasmine Kaur's demise. However, a psychiatric evaluation concluded that Tarakjot Singh was fully sane at the time, and he was charged with assassination. During the sentencing, the court heard about several messages Singh wrote but never sent to Jasmine in the days leading up to her death. These messages contained statements such as, "Your bad luck that I'm still alive, just wait and see. Every one of them will get an answer, and deep inside what I feel but can't overcome." The The prosecution informed the court that Singh downloaded a map of surveillance cameras across Adelaide the day before abducting Jasmine. Miss Mateo said that surveillance footage showed Singh purchasing zip ties from a hardware store on the afternoon of the abduction. She also mentioned that Singh removed the SIM card from his phone, placed it in another device, and left it at his home to engage cell towers that would create the impression he was at or near his home. He punished her, a defenseless, innocent girl, for rejecting him, she said. According to the prosecution, he forced her into the car, kept her on the back seat or in the trunk, took her a significant distance, ended her life, buried her, and disposed of any evidence that could implicate him in this crime. Judge Kimber sentenced him to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. His lawyer described the act as a crime of passion and appealed for a more lenient sentence, but the request was denied. Relatives of Jasmine, who was buried alive, were present during the sentencing. In her statement, Jasmine's mother welcomed the verdict. "Today I don't feel happy. I wish I wasn't making this statement and that Jasmine was still here with me," she said. Rashpal Kaur told the court she is haunted by the thought of what her daughter Jasmine Kaur experienced in her final moments. "I go through the terrible sequence of events, wondering when she realized she was in mortal danger," the statement read. "There was no one to save her. She spent her last hour on this earth with the worst of humanity. Jasmine is gone, and I am devastated with grief. She was a precious little girl." Rashpal Kaur stated that Singh was obsessed with Jasmine, who had rejected him 100 times. "She lost her life because Tarak Jat wanted to force her into marriage and force her into a relationship with him," she said. Mrs. Kaur stated she would never forgive Singh for what he had done. "Justice has prevailed, and I cannot express our relief. We welcome the sentence, but what I can say is that my family and I have already begun serving a life sentence, and we will have to spend the rest of our lives without Jasmine." Jasmine's employer and those she cared for described her as a beautiful soul who was kind, sweet, and attentive. Thus, 21-year-old Indian student Tarak Jat Singh, who abducted his former girlfriend, 21-year-old Jasmine Kaur, from a South Australian nursing home where she worked in North Plympton, Adelaide, in March 2021, was sentenced to life in prison for a term of no less than 23 years without the possibility of parole. He bound her with tape and zip ties and then buried her while she was still conscious at Death's Peak near Hawker in the Flinders Ranges. Singh, who was 20 at the time, initially pleaded not guilty to the crime against Miss Kaur, but changed his plea a month before the trial in the Supreme Court. Judge Adam Kimber ordered Singh to serve a sentence of 22 years and 10 months without the possibility of parole, just slightly more than the mandatory minimum term for ending someone's life in South Australia, which is 20 years. While rendering the verdict, Judge Adam Kimber described the crime as horrific and extremely heartless, stating he was at a loss for words to describe the terror of Miss Jasmine Kaur's final moments. "The terror she must have felt when she was abducted, tied up and held in the car during the long drive to Morallen Creek is hard to fathom," said Judge Kimber. "I cannot describe the horror that Miss Kaur must have felt when she realized that you were burying her alive." The court heard that Singh did not reveal details about how he abducted Miss Kaur from her workplace or what he did with her in the subsequent hours. However, Judge Kimber stated there was clear evidence that she suffered greatly and was forced to endure a long car ride while bound and gagged. After the sentence was announced, Judge Adam Kimber said it was clear that the crime was premeditated and that Singh took steps to conceal his horrific actions. "The enormity of what you did must have been clear to you," said the judge. "There was time to reflect. There was time to step back from the plan. Yet you proceeded and ended Miss Kaur's life." Judge Adam Kimber told Singh that he was beyond any reasonable doubt satisfied that the criminal was only concerned about himself. "You ended Miss Kaur's life to punish her for her unwillingness to maintain a relationship with you and for turning to the police," he stated. The police had warned Singh about stalking in early February 2021, less than a month before the crime. During the sentencing, the The court heard that Singh wrote several messages to Miss Kaur in the days before her death, which were never sent. At the trial, a statement Jasmine Kaur wrote to the police just 5 weeks before her death was read, detailing how her overly possessive perpetrator persistently followed her in the street and at her workplace. In the statement, signed January 28, 2021, Miss Kaur disclosed that she had been in a controlling relationship with Singh for about 9 months. He was overly possessive and wanted to control who I spent time with, the document released by the Supreme Court stated. Miss Kaur told the police that she ended the relationship on January 4, 2021, but Singh took it badly. He stated that I had to be with him, or else he would try to end his own life, she said. During their relationship, she mentioned Singh would sometimes get upset if she planned to go out with friends, calling her and demanding she come home. Singh, a citizen of India who came to Australia to study information technology at a university and who also worked at a nursing home, is likely to be deported once he is released from prison. Tarakjot Singh will be about 40 years old when he becomes eligible to apply for parole in January 2044. Jasmine Kaur became yet another victim of terror from a man, the attentive, sensitive, and kind. Tarakjot Singh, whom she loved and trusted, turned out to be a wolf in sheep's clothing, and his pathological jealousy and emotional instability cost her her life. A person who truly loves can never harm their beloved. They would take any blow upon themselves. In the case of Tarakjot, there is no right answer. Some may see in this story an insult, some incompetence, and others might consider the guy a psychopath. But looking at Jasmine's story, one can learn, at the cost of her mistakes, to prevent themselves and their loved ones from making similar ones in the future. Jasmine Kaur's case is a heart-wrenching story of toxic obsession and crime that shook the Australian backcountry, following the disastrous end triggered by the boyfriend's reprehensible behavior. North Carolina, the birthplace of country, blues, and Cherokee Indians, is now a fairly conservative and prosperous state in the northern part of the South Atlantic states. Unlike South Carolina, the state is fairly quiet in terms of crime, and if it does make the national news networks, it is more often due to snowstorms, tornadoes, and severe thunderstorms. The coast, with tropical storms and flooding, or acres of dense wildlife refuges, with the danger of wildfires and landslides, cause far more danger than people. But not always. On April 10, 2019, it was 17-year-old Tristan Borlase who caused the storm. The teenager, from a religious large family, rather violently massacred his loved ones at the family home in Deep Gap, North Carolina. On Wednesday evening, emergency services received a call from a young woman reporting a large amount of blood in her home and 3 missing family members, her parents, and younger brother. She added that she couldn't reach them. Police officers responded to the call and immediately drove to Deep Gap, about a mile from the Watauga and Wilkes County border. When patrol officers reached the home, they found blood on the walkway leading to the house, on the mat by the front door, and a blood trail inside the house stretching up the stairs. Officers searching the area outside found the body of a man covered in leaves under a hammock with several stab wounds. A little later, at about 10:30 p.m., the family's pickup truck was found hidden in the woods with the woman's body covered with a blanket and bags of mulch placed on top. A senseless, impulsive domestic tragedy. Jeffrey Borlase, Tristan's father, was born on April 16, 1975, the pastor of the conservative Pietist Bible Fellowship Church, a Protestant religious movement with Mennonite roots. The boy was brought up in an atmosphere of special importance of personal piety and the feeling of being constantly under the strict and watchful eye of God. Serious and careful study of the Bible in the meetings and moral instruction were the foundation of his upbringing. Any kind of entertainment, even laughter and colorful clothing, was frowned upon. Good works, charity, missionary work, love for the enemy, and renunciation of all kinds of violence were considered virtuous. Jeffrey absorbed all these fundamentals as the son of Pastor Harry Borlase. He grew up a kind, loving, gentle, and patient boy. As a young man, Jeffrey got a summer job at the Big Surf Water Park, located on Lake of the Ozarks in the U.S. state of Missouri. On his first day of work, the young man met a charming, meek girl. Her name was Tanya Mae Trandom. Same age, same views, and virtually the same upbringing. Tanya, like Jeffrey, had grown up in a family where Christian values were paramount. Patient, humble, selfless girl saw in the pious young man an ideal future husband and caring father. She gave Jeffrey a picture of an elderly couple holding hands and said, "That will be us one day." Jeffrey's mother, Kathy Brown, prayed that God would give her son a wife who loved the Lord with all her heart and believed her prayers were answered. The young lovers married, and their family became a continuation of the ideas in which they themselves were raised. The photo presented by Tanya was carefully kept in the family album. Quite quickly, the young couple had their first child, an adorable girl named Taylor. Then, one after another, came 3 more children. The youngest was a son, whom the parents named Tristan. Taylor became the truest big sister to her siblings. She took care of everyone, helped everyone, supported everyone, but especially the girl was friends with her younger brother. For Tristan, Taylor became the best and only friend. Despite the age difference, they were everywhere together. They played sports, were fond of music, and pranked together. Pietism believes that the task of parenting is to establish the kingdom of God in the child's heart. As the 4 children grew older, Jeffrey and Tanya decided to fulfill their Christian duty and adopted 4 more boys from the orphanage. Open, loving, and friendly, according to others, the family became even larger with a total of 8 children: Taylor, twins Kaya and Alexis, Misery, Al, Stephen, Meliku, and Tristan. According to the family's religious beliefs, children were forbidden to use cell phones and social networks until a certain age, and asceticism in needs and desires was encouraged. Boys were forbidden to date girls until the end of high school, that is, until the age of 18. Bible study and other religious matters were mandatory. Otherwise, children grew up like any other boys and girls. Parents made no distinction between native and adopted children. They were all given the same attention, care, and affection. The loving mother created a harmonious atmosphere and carefully watched the internal order, relations between brothers and sisters, prayed a lot, and did good deeds. The couple believed that virtue should be nurtured by their own actions and taught their children mercy by example. When the people of Haiti were hit by a hurricane, Tanya sold her expensive wedding ring and sent the proceeds to a foundation building housing for the victims. In return, she bought herself a simple, regular, cheap ring. In 2015, Taylor graduated from high school and moved to Boone to attend Appalachian State University. This event hurt Tristan deeply. He lost his only friend and was alone. Taylor came home at the first opportunity, but now she had her own free life, and Tristan was left with the same old rules and routines. He had rebelled against the restrictions set since childhood and disagreed with his parents' religious views. He was annoyed by the lack of a cell phone and the inability to communicate with his peers on social networks, especially since such communication has become an integral part of the life of modern teenagers. After Taylor's departure, quarrels with his parents only became more frequent. In December 2017, there were pleasant changes in the life of the family. Jeffrey and his wife and children moved to a new house with a large lot in Deep Gap, Watauga County in North Carolina. The house was located on a dirt road leading into a wooded area and was much more spacious than the previous home. In addition, the new dwelling was just under 2 miles from the home of Robin, Tanya's mother, and the children's grandmother. The close proximity made it possible to call on her at any time if help was needed in looking after the youngest children. Whether the move had been as pleasant a change for Tristan was unknown, for he had to change his school and his surroundings. In Watauga, he went to the local high school and started track and field. Other kids took jobs as counselors at summer camps. At first glance, it might have seemed that there was never any trouble in the Borlas household, but that was not the case. Over time, Tristan's behavior became troubling. In 2018, the school insisted on several consultations with a psychologist about anger issues and a lack of impulsive behavior control. By 2019, when the young man was in high school, despite his excellent abilities, he began to have trouble understanding some school subjects, and these difficulties only increased with each passing day. From a diligent student who had always participated in the life of the school before the move, He turned into an indifferent, withdrawn teenager who lost interest in his studies. Tristan began to be late for lessons and had no desire to learn at all. It got to the point where he would put his headphones on during class and sit with an absent look. Some teachers tried to help Tristan, and he even made contact, but everything ended with unchanged indifference and lack of interest. Besides, the young man did not always behave adequately at home. By this time, he already had everything he constantly argued with his parents about: his own cell phone and access to social networks. Tristan spent a lot of time on the internet. In his Instagram account, he referred to himself as a musician. Taylor was constantly interested in the lives of her siblings and noticed that Tristan quarreled with his parents more often and argued with his mom about religious topics. She learned of his other problems at school as well. The sister tried to talk to her brother, but the former closeness was no longer there. After a while, the young man became friends with a girl from the religious community, Evelyn Faith Jackson. They began to meet, not particularly observing the prohibition on intimate relations. Sometimes they smoked forbidden plants, and Tristan complained about his mother, who at night discusses his behavior with him, which made Tristan tired and unable to concentrate in school. The young man was very worried that he has many faults that make him not live up to his mother's expectations, and she cannot be proud of him. Told that with his father he can be himself, but with his mother it is different. On April 10, 2019, a lot of secret things from Tristan's life came to light. Surveillance cameras were installed in the barn where the goats were kept, and Tristan's old cell phone, which he sometimes used secretly from his parents, was used as an access point. On this day, Tanya took the phone for some reason and read text messages in which her son was having sexual conversations with girls and discussing illegal drugs with them. Tristan was at school at the time and saw his phone start blinking with incoming messages. Shocked parents wrote to him in a family chat about the information found on Tristan's old phone. That same day, Sherry King, an English teacher in Tristan's class, called his mother with complaints about the teenager's grades and behavior. She would later testify at trial that Tanya Borlaz called her back and told her that she and her husband would be at the school soon and would pick Tristan up early to discuss his grades with him. Sherry King relayed her parents' words to Tristan, who was extremely surprised by the news. The couple left their youngest child with his grandmother and went to the middle school to deal with what was going on. The ride home passed in silence. At trial, Tristan will testify that the mother seemed tense and frowned constantly while leafing through his phone. A conversation took place at home that lasted about an hour and a half, after which Tanya texted her mother and told her that Tristan was not upset that they had taken away his phone and car keys until grades and behavior improved, and she would be coming to pick up the younger child soon. The message was sent at 4 p.m., after which the conversation apparently continued. From Tristan's words, he and his mother talked about the need to do well in school, cleanliness in relationships with girls, the dangers of illegal drugs, and that she did not want him to study religions other than Christianity. He was forced to listen and realized how much there was in him that should be corrected. They even made a list of qualities he should have to become a better person: compassion, honesty. This list the police would later find. At one point, Tristan said his mother approached him from behind, put her arm around his neck and applied pressure, causing him to instinctively jump up, turn around, and accidentally elbow her. According to him, his mother had never done anything like that, and that's why he reacted that way. His mother was startled by the blow, grabbed what he thought was a pair of scissors from a shelf, and moved toward her son. He, being in shock at what was happening, stabbed her, thinking he was defending himself, and ran to his father for help. Later, forensic examination will find no evidence on Tristan's neck that his mother strangled him. And during the trial, the prosecution will show the jury photos of Tanya Borlas's neck taken by the medical examiner that show a broken neck bone. The psychologist, on the other hand, will show during the trial that, in his opinion, Tristan Borlase was mentally sane at the time of the crime, but suffered from a severely impaired cognitive state, experiencing depersonalization, derealization, and feeling events unreal. However, the court and jury would disregard the psychologist's opinion, finding Tristan to be a skillful manipulator and a socially dangerous individual. According to Tristan, he did not understand what was happening, why his father was running away from him, and why he stabbed his father when he caught up, even though he was begging him for help. He remembered his father picking up a rock and saying, "Tristan, don't," but was certain that his father would rather let him be killed than try to harm him. Neighbors later reported hearing loud screams on the Borlas property at about 5:30 p.m. that Wednesday. After it was over, Tristan returned to the house, where he vomited, which, in the psychologist's opinion, indicated severe stress, not cold-blooded, calculated murder. However, the jury disagreed with the psychologist's opinion. After all, they were presented with the forensic medical examiner's reports at trial. Jeffrey Borlas's autopsy report noted multiple stab wounds to the left chest and back, slash wounds to the arms and hands, and abrasions to the skull and forehead. Tanya Borlas's autopsy report indicated that she suffered multiple stab wounds, including to her left chest, back, and arm, as well as injuries that may have been sustained when her neck was compressed. The results indicate that the parents were defending themselves, not attacking. In addition, Tristan had a chance to get away from his mother if he felt threatened, and even if the mother was the victim of a sudden lapse of judgment and misperception of self-defense, the father's murder and subsequent actions already looked different. Tristan returned to the house, removed his mother's body and placed it in the truck, hiding it under a tarp. He then cleaned up the crime scene for about an hour and even used a hose to wash the porch outside the house. Around 8:30 p.m., Tristan arrived at his grandmother's house to pick up his younger brother. Robin thought this seemed extremely strange. Tristan explained that his parents urgently needed to go to the store and apologized that they didn't have time to stop by and pick up his brother. About 20 minutes later, Robin received a call from her other grandson, complaining that his parents were not answering the phone and had not come to pick him up from his part-time job as they usually did. Grandma dialed Alexis and asked her to go get her brother. They agreed that they would meet at Jeffrey and Tanya's house and figure out what had happened. As they drove up to the house, Robin noticed blood on the porch, but since the couple raised animals, she wasn't particularly concerned. She went into the house to get a flashlight to go check on the animals and saw that there was blood everywhere. At that time, Alexis ran into the house and reported that she had found some kind of body under the hammock near the animal barn, and she thought she saw Tristan with blood on his face in a getaway car. Alexis called emergency services. The operator told her, along with all family members, to lock themselves in the car and wait for the police to arrive. The police arrived 10 minutes later. After several hours of waiting outside and talking to officers, they were all taken to the station, where they were told that Jeffrey and Tanya Borlasi had been found dead. While examining the crime scene, detectives located a computer interface in the home that connected the video surveillance system located inside the home to the monitors. Detectives saw a screen on the monitor with a grid of various cameras broadcasting live video. They immediately requested a warrant to obtain the credentials from the system's servicing company. Meanwhile, Tristan contacted his girlfriend Evelyn and arrived at her home. She realized that he was worried about something, and he had a few scratches on his forehead and arms. Tristan assured her, however, that he had only had an argument with his parents and had gotten the scratches while playing with his dog. Evelyn described Tristan's injuries as 3 scratches on his forehead, a wound on his hand, a cut on his finger, and a bruised fingernail. Immediately after the crime, Tristan posted a photo of the injuries on Snapchat, writing that he was hurt by his father's dog. According to his girlfriend, the photo matched the injuries she saw on him that evening. Tristan stayed the night. The next morning, they went to Walmart and McDonald's and were going to go to school, but then changed their minds. Evelyn was convinced that Tristan just wanted to get away from his parents for a while, so she offered to stay with one of her relatives for a while. He agreed, and they traveled to another state. On April 11th, Sheriff's Office personnel obtained the username and password to the video surveillance system at the Borleys' home. They reviewed the camera footage and learned the circumstances of the crime. Police obtained a warrant for Tristan's arrest and turned over the details of the vehicle he allegedly drove away to the National Crime Information Center. A search for the car and subsequently, a chase began. Investigator Matthew received information that Tristan had been seen in Tennessee and began the paperwork involved in extraditing the alleged perpetrator. He asked Robin, Tristan's grandmother, to go with him to the apprehension so that he could talk to the young man in her presence, given his young age. As they drove in the car with Evelyn, Tristan noticed blue lights following them. He sped up and told his friend that his parents must have registered the car as stolen to find him. He sped down the highway trying to pull away, but eventually gave in to his pursuers and pulled over. The Ford was surrounded by police cars. Evelyn was completely confused when she saw her boyfriend being handcuffed and taken away in a squad car. The officers noticed that Tristan did not appear upset or agitated. His April 11, 2019 interview, which was conducted by investigator Matthew, was videotaped and audio recorded. The young man answered all questions, confessed to the crime, and detailed all his actions. At times, he cried. Tristan Borlas, who was a month away from his 18th birthday, was taken into custody without bail. A little later, the sheriff's office obtained a warrant to investigate Tristan's Snapchat account and a total of 5 of his cell phones that may have contained information related to the crime. A search warrant was also issued for the Orchard Road home, where detectives found another phone found in the master bedroom, a keyboard and pen from a safe, paper cups, a hammer, a straw, knives, a red-stained swab, eyeglasses, a kitchen towel, a hammock, a digital video recorder, a rug and miscellaneous papers, South Dakota cards, and boots. According to court documents, a search warrant was also issued for the Ford F-150 truck, and a red-stained swab, laptop computer, charger, and steering wheel cover were seized. A warrant was also issued to search the home of Tristan's girlfriend in Boone, as the young man was spending the night at her house. Court documents say a pillowcase, a zippered sweatshirt, and a notebook were seized from the property. The results of the investigations and searches helped investigators reconstruct the chronology of events down to the smallest moments. The version of self-defense was considered untenable. Funeral services for the couple were held on April 17, 2019 at Bible Fellowship Church. Pastors William Krantz and Brad Gray officiated the ceremony. The children, experiencing the loss of their parents at such an early age, found the strength to write a touching obituary. Our parents never got the opportunity to live for themselves because they always lived for us. Jeff and Tanya have always been an incredible joy to their parents and always a source of pride. Our parents made the world a better place, and we hope to continue that legacy by passionately loving people and pursuing Jesus. After the funeral, Taylor visited her brother in prison for the first time and was unpleasantly struck by his behavior. Not only was Tristan unrepentant, but he tried to blame the family for what had happened. It seemed to her sister that he was convinced he would regain his freedom sooner or later. Taylor felt disgusted, turned around, and left. Her second visit was on May 11th, on the occasion of Tristan's birthday. This time, she came with Grandma Robin, but the meeting was not much different from the previous one. Her brother was praising the party they'd thrown for him at the prison in honor of his birthday. Taylor found the behavior unacceptable, especially since their parents had died tragically. After this visit, the family decided to cut off any contact with Tristan. The trial began on February 16, 2022. At the trial, Tristan expressed regret for what had happened. He agreed with everything his family had said about him and supported the decision for a permanent ban on contact to make the family feel safe. On March 3rd, Tristan Borlas was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole on each count of first-degree murder. Judge Horn noted that mental health was somewhat of a mitigating factor, as the psychologist's report indicated that Tristan Borlas continued to suffer from anxiety, depression, and had developed symptoms consistent with post-traumatic stress disorder. However, Judge Horn stated that the psychologist found no evidence of psychotic disorders, although the anxiety and depression may indeed have been exacerbated by the continued use of illegal drugs. The most unusual fact in this story is that neither Tristan's family, nor his lawyer, nor he himself, made any statements about the motives that led to the crime. A pious family and a socially dangerous man using illegal drugs, who himself did not fully understand the reasons for what happened, or competently played the misunderstanding. That's on the one hand. And on the other hand, a self-hating young guy with low self-esteem, prone to depression, actively demonstrating symptoms of anxiety and not receiving the necessary qualified medical care. During the court session, the fact of panic attacks, which his mother helped him cope with, as she herself was prone to them, was voiced. One of the main provisions of the pedagogy of pietism: children burdened with original sin are immoral from birth, and therefore education and school should correct them, preparing them for the correct from the point of view of pietism, behavior in life, by establishing strict discipline and suppression of children's self-consciousness. Strict love is supposedly for the good. A child who may have had an inherited overreactivity of the nervous system grew up under strict limits, constantly feeling that he was not a good enough godly person. Some by nature need more love, some less. The little boy was intensely jealous, according to his older sister's recollections, of the new brothers, whose appearance shifted the parents' attention. First, there was rebellion, then depressed moods and feelings of worthlessness, joined by illicit weed, panic attacks, and depersonalization-derealization states. He didn't accept his parents' religiosity. He couldn't be what his mother wanted him to be, and to be what he was, meant to be in need of correction. Was that list of needed fixes that the two of them wrote together with his mom, instead of finding contacts for a good therapist, the last straw? And was there any way to avoid such a senseless and merciless tragedy in a truly loving family? According to official figures, more than tens of millions of people go missing every year around the world. About a third of them are found alive and unharmed. Almost half of them are found after a while dead as a result of accidents or murdered, and about 2 million people disappear without a trace every year. The latter are usually found neither alive nor dead, even after many years. The story of Agnes Clavina made a lot of noise in the fall of 2014, when a young and very attractive woman who was having fun in a club with friends as if vanished into thin air. Everyone who might have been involved seemed to escape any responsibility. However, in 2023, 9 years after the tragedy, the case took a completely unexpected turn. But let's get to the bottom of it. Who is Agnes Clavina? Our today's heroine was born in 1984, July 8th, in the capital of Latvia, the city of Riga. She grew up in an ordinary family and became the youngest of 2 daughters of her parents. Agnes's own sister Greta was only a couple of years older than her, so the girls were always very friendly and almost inseparable. The parents did their best to give their daughters a good education and let them realize their dreams. Agnes grew up a sociable, cheerful, and very active girl. She did well at school, played sports, and had a lot of friends. In the future, she dreamed to connect her profession with tourism or entertainment, because she loved to travel and knew how to organize perfect leisure time. In addition, Agnes also had a bright appearance and a spectacular figure, so men always gave her their attention and compliments. The girl from a young age has always had a lot of admirers who in every way to get her attention. After graduating from school, Agnes worked for some time in the service industry while attending language courses and studying to be a tourism manager. At the age of 20, she decided to move from her native Latvia to the foggy Albion and settled in London. She believed that here she would have more prospects and opportunities to unlock all her potential and talents. Parents and older sister did not oppose her decision and sincerely supported. Soon after the move, the beautiful blonde met a young man whose name was Michael Mills. He was older than Agnes by 8 years, had a good education, owned his own thriving business, opened a small movie theater and entertainment complex, and was considered a very successful man. He and Agnes quickly found a common language and soon began dating. Michael wooed Agnes beautifully, gave expensive gifts. Together they traveled and made far-reaching plans for their future together. The couple was truly in love and happy. It seemed that a long and prosperous life awaited them. According to the memories of those close to Agnes, this was her first true love. She seemed to glow at the sight of her chosen one and dreamed of becoming his lawful wife soon. In 2014, Clavina was offered a 3-month labor contract as an administrator in one of the largest and most popular nightclubs in the Spanish resort town of Marbella. Naturally, This job implied a temporary move to another country, but the ambitious and purposeful young woman did not want to miss this opportunity at all. Michael could not give up everything and go to Spain with his beloved because of his job, but he was not against her signing the contract. For Agnes, it was a great opportunity to try herself in a new field of activity, to gain invaluable experience, and perhaps further move and develop in this direction. It should be noted that Marbella is one of the most famous and attractive resorts on the Mediterranean coast. Here come vacationers from different parts of the world, mostly wealthy people who go to have fun and spend money. Here you can often meet show business stars, as well as famous athletes and businessmen. Clavina, who has always been very sociable, liked working in such a place. Before moving, she visited her family in Latvia and told them that she had signed a favorable employment contract for 3 months. She also shared another piece of good news. After returning to England, she and Michael were planning to get married. Dad, Mom, and sister were genuinely happy for Agnes and wished her luck. At the end of May 2014, Agnes, having packed only the most necessary things for one season, went to work in sunny Spain. Her lover stayed in London, but they called each other daily and communicated via video link, telling each other about everything that was happening to them. Clavina actively maintained her pages in various popular social networks, where she posted daily photos, small videos, and stories. She got a lot of followers who closely followed her activities and work. It was obvious that Agnes lived an interesting, busy life and enjoyed every day. After the end of her employment contract, Agnes decided to stay in Spain for a couple more months. It was the beginning of the velvet season in the resort, and during this period it was possible to earn good money. She consulted her boyfriend, and he supported her and promised to visit her for a few days because they had not seen each other for a long time and missed each other very much. Agnes almost immediately got a job as a hostess in a high-end restaurant and renewed her lease. In September, as expected, Michael visited her. They were having fun, planning the upcoming wedding and choosing a place to go on honeymoon. Less than a week later, the young man returned back to London, and Agnes had to work in Spain for another month, after which she was going to visit her relatives in Latvia and then fly to England to her lover. But these plans, alas, were not destined to come true. On September 6th, Agnes, in the company of her friends, went to one of the popular nightclubs in the region, the Costa del Sol. A few hours before, she had called her fiancé, who was aware of her plans and did not object to Agnes having fun with her friends. The young people enjoyed themselves and took pictures together, and Agnes posted several of them on her online profile that night. According to the memories of those who saw her that fatal night, the bright blonde was wearing a spectacular short dress and carrying a tiny white clutch handbag. Toward morning, when the friends were about to go home, Agnes said she planned to stay a little longer and then take a cab. She was always quite serious and responsible, and Agnes had not had much to drink, so her companions saw no reason to worry. At that moment, when the friends said goodbye and headed for the exit, Clavina was talking to a man who had bought her a cocktail and was clearly trying to win Agnes's favor. After that night, Clavina was never seen again, alive or dead. It seemed as if she had simply vanished into the crowded nightclub. No one could remember what time and with whom the blonde left the establishment, or where she had gone afterwards. The next day, Agnes did not show up at work, and when trying to contact her, it turned out that her phone was switched off. Colleagues and friends were the first to raise the alarm, but the police were slow to respond to their missing persons report. Toward evening, a worried Michael called Agnes's mother and said that he had been unable to contact his fiancée all day, which had never happened before. The next day, Agnes's parents and fiancé jointly tried to contact the Spanish police to report the disappearance. However, they were told that the relatives had to file such a report in person, otherwise it would not be considered. After these words, Michael and Clavin's family took the next flight to Marbella. In the end, the missing persons report was filed by the family only 5 days after Agnes had disappeared without a trace. The first thing that was checked was the apartment Agnes had rented, but it looked as if the owner had gone out for a while and would be back soon. Documents, money, and a few expensive pieces of jewelry were in their places. The refrigerator was stocked with prepared food, and on the bed were several outfits from which Agnes had chosen what to wear to the club on her last night. It was obvious that Clavina had not been in her apartment since the day she had gone out with her friends. Her phone had been turned off, she had left no more posts on social media, and she had not responded to any messages. It was only then that the police began investigating the disappearance, but precious time was irretrievably lost. Agnes's friends and family began to post flyers all over the city with her picture and requests for help in the search. The story was also picked up by the media, featured on television news programs, and Agnes's pictures were on the front pages of local newspapers. The first leads and clues emerged after the police studied the footage from the CCTV cameras located inside and outside the entertainment venue. However, there were also some problems with this, because all the files had already been erased by that time, and the police had to ask for help from specialists in order to restore them. But the efforts were not in vain, and on one of the recordings, made by a camera located at the exit to the parking lot, it was seen how Agnes, around 6 o'clock in the morning, leaves the club with a man, and does it clearly not of her own free will. This last footage, which showed Clavina alive, was to be studied in detail, but the closer the experts looked at them, the more frightening they seemed. Agnes was being led by a man of large build, and it was obvious that she was walking with him under compulsion because he was holding her tightly by the waist. Agnes looked frightened, tried to break free several times and said something emotionally, but her companion persistently led her to the parking lot, where he literally forced her into his Mercedes A63 with tinted windows. At the moment when the big man was pushing her into the cabin, it was visible that another man was already inside. While the first man was heading for the driver's seat, Agnes managed to open the car door, after which she tried to get out and escape. But at that moment, the doorman who was standing next to her came up, and the driver gestured and said something. The doorman pushed Agnes back into the car, after which the driver handed him something, apparently a cash reward for his help. About 6 minutes after Agnes was in the car, her phone was switched off and was never switched on again. It was also impossible to trace the further movement of the vehicle because there were no CCTV cameras along the way. It became obvious that the men who were in the cabin were the last to contact the missing beauty. Surprisingly, the case was given a high level of secrecy from the start. Everyone involved in the investigation signed non-disclosure documents, and information was not only kept out of the press, but even Agnes's loved ones were hardly ever given any information. For the first few months, parents and fiancé were kept in the dark. They were only told that the investigation was underway and that it was too early to draw any conclusions. But judging by the fact that Agnes had not given any information about herself during this time, there was little hope that she was still alive. Michael periodically gave interviews in which he asked for help in finding his fiancée, but no one ever responded to his requests. Only 6 months later, the relatives were shown the very footage from the club cameras, as well as the names of all 3 men who had last contacted Agnes. The large man who had forcibly taken the young woman out of the club and pushed her into the car was identified as Wesley Capper, the son of a well-known British millionaire and a very powerful man. In the passenger compartment of the car sat his longtime buddy named Craig Porter, who had no particular occupation and was periodically on the police's radar. The third was a dark-skinned doorman whose name was Sian Usman. Porter and Usman stated unanimously under interrogation that they were innocent, that Agnes had gotten into the car voluntarily. According to Capper, he and a friend spotted the beautiful blonde in a club and approached her to get acquainted. She was allegedly already pretty drunk, which contradicts the testimony of her friends, but didn't refuse a drink when they bought her a drink. Wesley then proposed to continue the party at his luxurious house in the country, to which Agnes agreed. Already in the car, Agnes allegedly changed her mind about going to the private party at Wesley's house and asked to be dropped off in the middle of the road, saying she would take a cab and go to her home. The man claimed to have dropped the passenger off where she asked, which was an unlit stretch of road that soon turned out to have no CCTV cameras either. But Craig Porter could neither confirm nor deny the words of Wesley Capper, because he himself, according to his confession, was also very drunk and did not even understand when and how Agnes was in their car. Moreover, he stated that he fell asleep as soon as they drove away from the parking lot, and when he woke up, The young woman was no longer in the cabin. The third suspect, the doorman Cian Usman, also said that Agnes Clavina was drunk, but could not answer the question whether she had gotten into the car voluntarily. He did, however, confirm that when the car touched down, the blonde opened the door and almost fell out as she was driving. Then the doorman, at the request of the driver, slammed the door, for which he received a substantial tip. When Cian Usman was asked whether he thought it was strange that the woman had tried to escape by jumping out of the car while walking, he said he didn't think it was an escape attempt. In his opinion, she could have accidentally opened the door because she was intoxicated. He also added that Agnes did not scream or ask for help. The footage clearly showed Wesley Capper forcefully leading Agnes to the car, holding her by the waist and wrist. Wesley's defense was that Agnes was dizzy and he was holding her down so that she would not fall. Sometime later, the investigation came across another curious but also strange and frightening video, which was made in Sotogrande in the south of Spain, in the port of Puerto de la Duquesa. The luxury yacht of John Capper, a millionaire who was the father of one of the suspects, was moored there. The footage, dated September 10th, 4 days after Agnes's disappearance, shows Wesley, Craig, and 2 other men boarding the yacht. They were carrying a large suitcase which, judging from the footage, was quite weighty, as well as a rolled-up carpet. When the company returned to the port of Puerto de la Duquesa a few days later, they had no luggage with them. After the footage was shown to Capper, he claimed that he and his friends had sailed to Ibiza to have fun. The suitcase, he said, contained their belongings, and what the investigation mistook for a carpet was bedding. Where it all subsequently went, he could not explain. A thorough search of Wesley's yacht and automobile yielded no results. As it turned out, both had been cleaned and dry cleaned, destroying any traces of DNA. However, a long blonde hair was found in the trunk of the car, but it was not possible to establish its origin because this crucial evidence mysteriously evaporated during the investigation. At the trial, the prosecution told another curious detail. As it turned out, a few hours after Agnes was in the defendant's car, Capper called the emergency services several times, but each time he dropped the call without waiting for an answer, as if he was afraid or doubted the correctness of his actions. The man himself explained that he was drunk and made the calls randomly. The lawyer for the Clavin family stated that Agnes, in his opinion, was long dead, and that her body was resting somewhere on the seabed in the very suitcase that the suspects had brought aboard the yacht. In addition, he believed that the case was deliberately delayed, and the criminals had plenty of time to get rid of all the evidence that could prove their guilt. Only a year and a half after Agnes's disappearance, Capper, Porter, and Usman found themselves in the dock. They were accused of holding Agnes against her will and forcing her into a car. Unfortunately, due to the lack of evidence, there was nothing more to charge them with. Moreover, the millionaire and his friend were released on bail and quietly left the courtroom. Naturally, Agnes's relatives were outraged by this, but the judge was adamant. All 3 men were only brought to trial again in 2019, almost 5 years after Agnes's disappearance. They still denied their guilt and insisted that Clavina had gotten into the car of her own free will. The prosecutor asked that the doorman be considered an accomplice to the crime because he helped the defendants drive the victim away. Usman could have received a sentence of 5 years in prison for his actions. In response, he made a fiery speech in which he said that he was among the suspects because of the color of his skin, as well as the lack of opportunity to hire a good lawyer, because all the money he earns he sends to a starving family in Africa. Capper and Porter's lawyers insisted that their clients were guilty only of persuading Agnes to get into the car, but not of forcing her to do so. In their opinion, the young woman was dropped off on the road as she had requested, but while she was waiting for a cab to go home, she could have been kidnapped and killed by third parties because Agnes was drunk and could not offer much resistance. The verdict of the judge surprised and angered the relatives of the missing young woman because none of the defendants, in fact, was not punished at all. Usman was cleared of all charges. Capper was sentenced to 2 years for taking advantage of Agnes's drunken state to persuade her to get into his car, and Porter received 6 months for complicity. In reality, the men received suspended sentences and did not spend a single day in prison, but paid Agnes's family the ridiculous sum of £10,000 sterling in compensation. Clavin's family were discouraged by the decision and appealed. And then it turned out that both defendants in the case, while waiting for the court's decision, managed to break the law once again. Capper, being in a state of alcoholic and drug intoxication, knocked down a woman to death and fled the scene, and Porter and his friend, also drunk, stole a car, having previously beaten its owner to a pulp. But even for this serious crime, Capper was sentenced only to probation thanks to the brilliantly built defense of his lawyers. He paid a large sum in compensation to the family of the woman killed under the wheels of his car, and he himself remained at large. Porter was less fortunate this time, and he still went to jail, but there is no information in public sources about the sentence he received. In 2021, almost 7 years after Agnes's disappearance, the main suspect in the case was punished. Wesley had been living an immoral lifestyle all this time, abusing alcohol and illicit substances, which had severely compromised his health. At the height of the COVID pandemic, he found himself in a hospital bed, and when he thought he had conquered the disease, he suddenly had a stroke. Capper died on July 26, 2021, in his 44th year of life. At that time, Agnes's parents filed another appeal with the court. But now the suspect can no longer be prosecuted because he is dead, no matter what the Supreme Court decides in this difficult case. An unexpected twist 9 years later. Although Agnes Clavina was never found dead or alive, she was still presumed dead sometime later. Her parents, sister and fiancé, agreed with the lawyer's version that the criminals had placed Agnes's body in a suitcase, which was subsequently loaded onto a yacht and dumped somewhere on the high seas so that it could not be found. However, in the summer of 2023, 9 years after Agnes disappeared without a trace, the case took an unexpected turn, so in mid-June, a gardener of one of the elite golf clubs, La Quita, located in the Costa del Sol region cleaning the area, found a strange object near the coast, which upon closer inspection turned out to be an old, badly damaged suitcase. The man did not dare to open it himself and called the police. Inside the suitcase, law enforcers found human remains. The examination showed that the bones found belonged to a young woman whose approximate age at the time of death was 25, 35 years old. In addition, it was also found that the suitcase with the body inside had spent about 10 years in the water before it was brought to the shore. After comparing all the facts, the police hypothesized that the body found belonged to Agnes Clavina, who disappeared 9 years ago. In order to establish this unequivocally, a number of examinations are required to compare Agnes's DNA with the remains found. At the moment, experts are working closely on this issue, but the details of the investigation have not yet been made public. If the suspicions are confirmed, it will be a reason to reopen the case and bring the surviving suspects to trial.